It's the summer of 2010 in the suburb of Deer Park, Washington. The kind of place where everyone knows their neighbors.
Deer Park is a little town that is 20 miles north of Spokane.
Deer Park's a good place to raise kids. Everybody knows everybody. Nothing goes unnoticed.
41-year-old Shannon Starbuck is a recent divorcee and the mother of 5 children.
Shannon was tall, 5'10", 5'11", blonde, beautiful, flawless skin. She reminded me almost of an old-time kind of movie star.
Since her divorce 2 months ago, Shannon has big plans.
She was attempting to better herself by going to college for dental assisting.
She was looking forward to being able to do her own thing and to earn her own money and to pay her bills.
But one person isn't thrilled about Shannon's new independence.
Hi, Clay. Hi. Here's your mail. It's still coming here.
Her ex-husband, Clay.
Clay's a handsome guy, and he's tall, dark-haired.
Kind of a frontiersy guy, beard, kind of gruff looking. He was charismatic. He was a family man. Oh, I'm sorry.
Shannon and Clay first met in their early 20s.
It's okay.
Clay was immediately drawn to the beautiful Mormon church girl.
Shannon and Clay met at a church dance in southern Florida.
You're picking up the kids from school today, right?
Of course.
Okay, great.
Clay was what she preferred to date. Like that look, that type of big and tall.
I'm gonna get back to it, but have a good day.
You too.
Okay, bye.
But in the decades that followed, trouble in their marriage led the couple to divorce, not once, but twice.
She thought it would be better for the kids for them to be divorced, that it was just not a good environment when they were together.
In spite of their rocky relationship, Clay still hopes for a reconciliation.
He wanted her back. He always claimed that he loved her, that no one else would love her like he did.
But Shannon clearly doesn't share his feelings. And that summer, she decides to start dating.
I had tried to set her up a couple times, and she'd look at pictures, and she was picky. She was picky about who she wanted to go out with. She said, well, it's so hard to meet people, and I said, why don't you try online dating?
Curious about whom she might find, Shannon sets up a profile page.
Shannon's profile basically laid out, who she was, what she was like, and most importantly, what she was looking for in her life.
She wanted to be able to carry on a conversation with someone that was intelligent and deep.
Everything that Clay is not. In September of 2011, Shannon gets a message from a man named John Wilson. He appears to fulfill all of her physical requirements. Tall, handsome, with what he describes as an athletic body. Shannon responds enthusiastically.
Shannon told John about her family and her lifestyle, the fact that she was divorced and that she had 5 kids.
But John is more secretive.
He gives her limited information. He tells her that he is a caretaker for an elderly couple that live in North Spokane and that he's a substitute teacher.
Yet there is one point John makes perfectly clear.
He's very upfront with anybody who happens to stumble on this. He says, hey, I'm looking for fun.
In other words, John isn't in the market for a serious relationship. A few days later, John agrees to meet Shannon at her house while her kids are at school.
She was hesitant to be seen outside of the residence with any guy.
She's like, I don't want anybody meeting my kids. And she wanted to really keep it very quiet that she was dating at all.
Hi.
Hi. Shannon.
Hi.
Pleasure to meet you.
Oh, gosh. It's nice to meet you.
When John and Shannon first meet, John is really kind of surprised at how beautiful Shannon is. She's probably more than he expected from his online experience.
I'll put these in some water.
And Shannon is equally impressed by John. But there's one problem. John is not the same man who appears in his profile picture. And strangely, Shannon doesn't say anything about it.
Here, let me show you around.
Shannon either doesn't notice or is willfully ignorant. She wants to get to know this guy.
Come on.
For the next few hours, Shannon and John get acquainted by the couch.
Here is your tea.
They engage in just idle chit-chat at first, play a board game of Scrabble.
All right.
Shannon is immediately attracted to John, and in no small part because he is very different from her ex-husband, Clay. He treats her like a woman, and he's capable of having intellectual conversations.
Pretty soon, their seemingly innocent board game leads to something more.
As this kind of get-to-know-one-another board game continues, it's a kind of an intimate setting, and a little flirting breaks out.
And while they're busy playing, they lean over and start kissing.
And before they know it, Shannon and John are upstairs, in broad daylight, in the bed she once shared with her ex.
Right from the start, this couple is very passionate. Shannon's along for the ride.
Taking John into the bedroom is a big step for Shannon, and this is symbolically a major way for her to step away from her marriage.
Hidden away from the gaze of her small town, Shannon is finally free to enjoy her single life.
This is one dirty little secret for Shannon.
But who is this mysterious man with the false profile picture? Shannon's online dating adventures are about to lead her on an erotic trip beyond her wildest fantasies and into a dangerous world of smoke and mirrors where no one can be trusted. It's 2011 in Deer Park, Washington, and Shannon Starbuck, a recent divorcee, is indulging in a passionate sexual relationship with a man she met online. And it's all happening while her children are at school. For now, it's Shannon's secret. Her family and friends have no idea what's going on behind closed doors.
This is a small town, and if she's seen out in the public somewhere with somebody people don't connect her with, man, the small town tongues are wagging.
But despite Shannon's efforts to keep a low profile, that fall, rumors of her dating reach her ex-husband, Clay.
Yeah, what's up? Really? What did he look like?
Through the kids, Clay learns that Shannon is now dating, and she's meeting guys through the internet. Not what he really wants to hear. He's a very protective person of his family.
Did they go back to the house?
She's thinking, you know, are strangers coming to the house? Where are they meeting? Where are they spending time? What do the kids know about it?
His concern seemed to be, who were these people? Who was around my kids?
Clay knows that Shannon won't take kindly to his concern about her social life.
He doesn't really want to confront Shannon. To take a step back and use other resources to find out what was going on seemed to him to be the best idea.
So Clay begins quietly, keeping an eye on things. But Shannon quickly catches on.
When Shannon finds Clay outside the house, she's not happy.
She felt that maybe he might have been invading her privacy a little bit.
Not only did this interfere with her newfound independence, but it reminded her of all the reasons she wanted out of the marriage.
Fed up, Shannon decides to put her foot down.
And Shannon does what she thinks she has to do under the circumstances.
He keeps coming by. Honestly, I don't feel comfortable anymore. I think maybe we should look into a restraining order.
This restraining order that Shannon got prohibits Clay from doing anything to contact her but texting. No phone calls, no visits, just text.
I'm not sure what else to do.
Breaking free from Clay gives Shannon a thrilling sense of freedom and empowerment. And soon, she finds herself spending more time with her private online lover, John.
Shannon and John continue to see one another. Now it's almost a weekly thing. For Shannon, this was such a tremendous change. John is the kind of guy who's making her feel like a beautiful woman.
I really gotta get going.
One afternoon, Shannon tells John that she's ready to take what they have to the next level.
Shannon began to want more from the relationship.
For Shannon, like most women, the hot sex develops into an emotional bond. For her, emotions and sex are inextricably linked.
Take care of business.
But John's reaction is not what she'd hoped for.
Look, I told you in the profile. I'm just looking to have some fun. Let's not ruin this, okay?
He tells her, look, I told you this was fun from the start. It's still just fun. I understand if you want more than that, and we'll just end this.
But does this lover boy just want to have fun? Or is he hiding dangerous secrets? Although spurned by his refusal to make things more serious, Shannon isn't ready to give John up yet. But she also decides to go back online to expand her horizons.
As Shannon continues her search efforts, she does see a guy here and a guy there that at least is interesting enough to go out with. But after these dates, nothing's clicking.
Then one day, she gets a message from a man named Tom.
Tom, he's athletic, he seems to be fit, intelligent. It looks like this guy might fit the bill.
Shannon sends him a message suggesting they meet in person. It's a big step, but with her divorce now far behind her, she's ready to date in the open.
Shannon approaches the prospect of meeting Tom differently this time. She wants to meet Tom in public.
On November 7th, Shannon and Tom meet at a nearby restaurant.
Hi, are you Shannon?
Hi, Tom?
Yes.
When Tom meets Shannon, he had to be pretty impressed. This is an attractive woman. This woman is a catch. When Shannon meets Tom, he's actually the guy whose picture is in the profile online. This is a good sign for her. He's honest, he's open with her, talks about his life, and they do hit it off.
The two set up a date to see each other again. Almost immediately, the anticipation starts to build.
In this time between their lunch and this planned date a few weeks down the road, both Shannon and Tom are anxious to get to know one another.
Then one day, Shannon gets a suggestive text from Tom, and her imagination runs wild.
Their messages get increasingly explicit.
They're sharing ideas and ultimately pictures.
Before long, Shannon and Tom are regularly exchanging sexually charged messages.
Tom and Shannon are obviously starting to fantasize about one another, and the texts reflect that.
For now, Shannon is having the time of her life with her various suitors. But as the winter approaches, not everything in Shannon's life is going as well as her romantic endeavors.
Shannon hadn't found that job as a dental assistant yet, and Clay wasn't working, so that financial resource was gone. It was a tough time.
Nobody knew how bad off Shannon was. When I found out, I was horrified. She had almost been evicted a couple of times. She had her power shut off. Her car had been repoed.
Shannon's friend comes to her rescue.
Hi, Summer.
I said, why don't you borrow my pickup? Then you at least can go to the grocery store. You can take the kids wherever they need to go.
You sure?
Shannon takes Summer up on the offer. But a few days later, when she goes out to the truck, Shannon makes a disturbing discovery.
She called me one day and said, I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry. I said, what happened? She said, all the windows have been shot out of the truck. And I went, oh, no.
Shannon is shaken to the core. Then, over the course of that month, Shannon begins to notice other strange occurrences, this time inside her home.
She would feel like she had guns stolen, jewelry stolen, or she would go in and feel like somebody had been there. Just, you know, when you go into your home and it doesn't feel right.
And as the days pass, Shannon becomes convinced that someone is watching her.
Shannon would always call her mom and say, Mom, there's something going on.
She was telling me what was going on with the breaking into the house and stealing the jewelry and moving things around in the house. And that would creep me out.
Is someone trying to send Shannon a threatening message? She decides to take precautions.
And she changes the locks at the house.
Could it be her overprotective ex-husband, Clay? Her lover, John, who's determined to protect his privacy? Or her new flirt, Tom, who may not be the nice guy she thinks he is? On the afternoon of December 1st, Shannon is scheduled to pick her daughter up from school. But by 3 o'clock, Shannon still hasn't arrived.
The kids are wondering where their mom is, and so the kids are texting her, trying to get in touch with her.
Finally, they get a response.
She texts her daughter and says, I'm not feeling well. Your brother is going to pick you up.
He picks up his sister and the children go to Clay's house. But later that night, no one can get a hold of Shannon again.
It's like she's disappeared.
For months, Shannon Starbuck has been leading a secret life that no one knows about except her male suitors. But her world is about to be exposed in the most horrific and scandalous way imaginable. Shannon Starbuck, a divorced mother of 5 in Deer Park, Washington, is missing.
Nobody had any idea where she was. And in a small town like Deer Park, that was very alarming.
On December 2nd, Shannon's ex-husband, Clay, calls the police. He says the last anyone heard from Shannon was around 3 p.m. the previous day, when she texted their daughter to say she wasn't feeling well.
Spokane County Sheriff's Department went to Shannon's home, knocked on the door, didn't see any sort of strange activity around her home, didn't see any broken windows, didn't see anything that made it seem like there was something suspicious going on.
The deputy tells Clay that there isn't anything he can do at that point in time.
By the next day, Shannon has been missing for close to 48 hours. Her mother is frantic.
It had been a few days since I had heard from Shannon, which was very unusual because we always talked and texted. She always answered. I wanted someone to get out and check on my daughter.
The Spokane County Sheriff's Department decides to check on Shannon again, but this time they gain access to the house. And when the officers enter the master bedroom, they find a horrific scene. It's Shannon, and she's dead.
They discover Shannon's body. She's got bruising to her arm. Her chest area has injuries consistent with a struggle. She's got marks around her neck that would appear consistent with strangulation.
But that's not all. Shannon's body appears to have been posed in a most disturbing way.
Somebody put her like this.
She's lying on the bed with her clothing pulled back, leaving her exposed. And there is a sexual device inserted inside her. The investigators begin the grim task of processing the scene.
The The assailant most likely touched the victim on the neck, on the wrists, and so the medical examiner takes some swabs for DNA testing.
They also searched the house to determine how the killer got in, but find no signs of forced entry.
What this tells me is that whoever committed this crime accessed the house at a moment of opportunity when the doors and windows was unlocked, or that the victim knew the assailant and allowed them in of their own free will.
The violation of Shannon's body and the lack of forced entry lead investigators to one conclusion.
She knew them. She let them in.
In most situations where a person is posed, it's a personal vendetta type crime. It means something to the person who has done it.
At Shannon's house.
Clay was completely surprised by everything that was taking place. He saw major crimes and was all upset, like, what's going on? Why is major crimes here? He was informed that Shannon was deceased, and he collapses to his knees.
But the detectives refused to tell him how Shannon died or let him near the crime scene. Instead, they asked Clay to go to the police station.
Sir, we need you to go down to Station B on 14th Street and give them a formal statement.
As her ex-husband, he's considered a person of interest.
Come on.
There had been a little bit of suspicion kind of swirling around that maybe Clay did it, that they need to look at Clay as the suspect.
At the station, investigators asked Clay about the last time he spoke with Shannon.
He told us that he had texted Shannon the morning of December 1st, 2011, telling her that his car broke down and that she needed to take the kids to school.
Shannon dropped the children off, and he claims to have spent the day trying to fix his car. Then, around 3 p.m., Clay says their daughter received a final text from Shannon.
She sent me a text telling me that she couldn't pick the kids up.
It was the last anyone heard from her. For now, Clay is still considered a person of interest, but with no information to contradict his story, he's free to go. But surprisingly, Clay stays put and has a lot more to say.
When the interview was over, Clay wouldn't leave. He stuck around and wanted to provide more information and seemed adamant that everything we needed to know was going to be found on her cell phones and her computers.
And he kept telling detectives, you look at the online things that she had been doing, you look through the phone records, that will tell you everything that you need to know. He kept reiterating that point.
Meanwhile, detectives have begun to do just that. They scour Shannon's cell phone, which was found just a few feet from her body.
Shannon's phone was key to the investigation for the police. This device was the last way that anybody had any contact with Shannon when she was alive.
Several numbers show up on her phone from her friends and family and a mystery man.
Got a lot of text messages and calls from this guy named Tom.
One message in particular stands out. It was sent to Shannon on the day she died.
Tom had a sexual exchange by text message about what he would like, and he would like to see a photograph of her in a sexually explicit manner.
He sent her a text message to pose provocatively. That's how we found the body, right?
Mm-hmm. The pose that is asked for is the exact same pose Shannon's body is found in on the bed.
It's an astonishing discovery. Could this Tom be the one who killed Shannon and then positioned her? The case has gone into overdrive, and it's only the beginning. Will Shannon's secret love life lead police straight to the truth behind this gruesome murder? Police in Spokane, Washington, are investigating the case of 42-year-old Shannon Starbuck, who was murdered and men positioned in a humiliating pose on her bed. A few hours into the investigation, detectives get their first lead. They uncover a text message on Shannon's cell phone from a man who asked Shannon to pose in exactly the same way she was found dead.
Let's give that guy a buzz, bring him in.
Tracking down Tom was very easy because his phone number was right there in Shannon's phone.
Yeah, hi, Tom? This is Spokane Police Department.
The investigators asked Tom to come in for questioning.
I revealed to him that this was a homicide investigation, and he seemed very surprised by the fact.
Detectives asked Tom about the provocative text found on Shannon's cell phone.
And you sent her a text message to pose sexually. Is that correct?
Yes, we have been.
He says they only met once, but had been sexting for weeks in anticipation of their next date, up until the day she died.
He admitted that he had talked to her and that he had asked her for the picture, but strongly denies that he ever had any involvement in her murder.
I had nothing to do with this murder.
Next, Tom is asked where he was on the day Shannon was murdered. Since the medical examiner was unable to establish a specific time of death, investigators believe she was killed sometime after the last text message was sent from her phone at around 3 p.m.
And he's able to lay out a pretty decent timeline of the places where he's been, specifically on December 1st.
I had a work conference.
So if we check on that, they will vouch for you.
Yes, please check.
All right, we will.
But still, without an exact time of death, Tom remains a strong suspect. It's now been weeks since Shannon was killed. Detectives go back to Shannon's cell phone for more clues and land on yet another suspicious series of texts.
In going through Shannon's text messages, we find these exchanges from an email account under the title of Just Wondering 06.
And Just Wondering 06 had plans to meet Shannon.
We realized that they've had an encounter that was scheduled for December 1st.
The day she died.
We don't know who this person is. We don't have a phone number to associate him with, and we have to go searching. And we get a hit for a man by the name of John Wilson.
It turns out this John Wilson isn't as easily contacted as Tom. Investigators trace his calls only to learn he's been contacting Shannon from a public computer and phone at a local library.
So the calls from the payphone is a very big red flag because of the fact that this person now appears like they've got something to hide. He does not want to be found.
Investigators try sending a message to John's username and wait for a response.
I identified myself as being with the sheriff's office. It took very little time, about 20 minutes, and he gave me a call.
At first, John is cagey.
Told me that he, in fact, was not John Wilson. He didn't want to identify who he was.
So detectives are forced to change strategies. They tell John that they have a picture of him taken from surveillance video at the public payphone. And if he doesn't come forward, they'll go public with a photo.
At that point, he realized that he would be identified because he was a rather well-known person to a number of people here in town.
John agrees to come in for questioning, and the investigators finally learn what he's been hiding.
And then he opens up and says, okay, I'll tell you who I am.
I got a wife. I got a family, all right?
He is a school teacher in Spokane. He has a lot to lose if anyone catches him having an affair with another woman. So he went to great lengths to hide who he was.
For months, John had been dating under an online profile with a fake name and photos, and all the while, Shannon never knew he was married with children. It's a huge revelation, but there's more. John admits he had been to Shannon's house on the day she died. Not once, not twice, but at least 3 times, with his last visit at 10:30 p.m., hours after the final text was sent from Shannon's phone.
He travels up to Deer Park and he makes these multiple attempts to contact Shannon and is unable to do so.
He went around the house. He looked around in the windows. I mean, he was knocking on the door numerous times. He went back again.
There are 3 opportunities here that he could have killed her during any one of these.
John agrees to provide a DNA sample, but the detectives remain suspicious.
We both walked away at that time with this eerie feeling about John that this guy could still be our suspect.
3 weeks after Shannon's death, the investigation reaches a standstill. There are 3 persons of interest: Shannon's ex-husband, Clay, and Tom and John, the 2 men she was dating online.
But there was no timestamp on the murder. There was nothing to say she died at this specific time. So it couldn't rule this person out. It couldn't rule that person out.
Then there's a break in the case. Detectives receive records from the cell phone company and notice one number that, for safety reasons, didn't appear on Shannon's actual phone.
I'm going through her cell phone records, and on the top line of a sheet is a 911 call. And I can remember standing up at my desk going, oh my God, she called 911. It was an incredible moment.
The call was placed at 9:18 a.m., and police are convinced they're listening to a recording of Shannon's final moments.
In playback, you can hear a distinct noise that sounds like potentially a struggle. Someone definitely in distress is what you can hear.
Based on this new information, the investigators now believe Shannon died around 9:18, the morning of December 1st. And any messages sent from her phone after that time could only have been sent by one person, the killer. The hunt is on for the man who murdered Shannon Starbuck. And when it's all over, forensic evidence and a seemingly innocent video will expose the lies and motives of a deranged monster. For the past few weeks, the Spokane County Sheriff's Office has been investigating the murder of divorcee Shannon Starbuck. They now believe Shannon called 911 moments before she was killed, estimating the time of death after 9:18 a.m. on December 1st, 2011. Detectives return to the initial suspects to trace their movements during this earlier time frame. Tom, who asked Shannon to send him a salacious photo that day, said he was nowhere near Shannon's home.
We're able to see through Tom's phone that his cell phone doesn't appear to ever be in the Deer Park area, so we are able at that point then to exclude him as a possible suspect.
But their most promising suspect, John, admitted he stopped by Shannon's house at least 3 times that day. And lo and behold, he also claims to have an alibi for where he was at 9:18 that morning.
I was getting coffee.
He bought a coffee about the same time that Shannon was murdered, and there was no way that he could have bought the coffee and got to Deer Park and got that coffee at the same time.
You guys can check it out, Spokane Coffee Shop.
And luckily for him, he orders an unusual coffee.
Caramel latte, check the receipts.
Okay, if that checks out, then we're good.
And the barista there is able to confirm this by his unusual coffee order, and he's got the receipt to prove it.
John is ruled out as a suspect. That leaves one person. Is it possible that Clay, Shannon's ex-husband, and the father of their 5 children could have been responsible for this heinous crime?
So the investigators circle back. They look specifically at Clay's story.
Clay told police that his car broke down that morning, and he spent the rest of the day trying to fix it.
He said he walked on that street 4 times at least, going back and forth between the broken down vehicle and his house.
When investigators retrace Clay's steps, they find a home with a security camera pointing towards the road. The footage reveals something unexpected.
Not once on there do we ever see Clay Starbuck pass by the house, which he was very adamant to us he had passed by numerous times that day. When we saw the video, there was no mistaking that he hadn't told us the truth.
But that's not all. In early 2012, nearly 2 months after Shannon was killed, the DNA results are in.
I received a laboratory report that indicated that the DNA was analyzed, and they were the samples taken from Shannon's neck and facial area around her mouth and from her nails, her right-hand nails, and that DNA was consistent with being DNA from Clay Starbuck or any of his male children.
But Clay and Shannon's 2 sons both had solid alibis.
It's Detective Marichek at the Spokane Police Department.
So they reach out to the school, confirm that indeed the 17-year-old was there, and the 20-year-old was at work. The cops then felt comfortable in ruling them out.
Leaving just one possible killer.
Thank you.
Clay. On February 6th, Clay is arrested and charged with aggravated murder and sexually violating human remains.
We went up to Deer Park and we picked Clay up and had him transported.
Investigators are now confident they know what happened to Shannon Starbuck. In the weeks leading up to the murder, Clay had grown increasingly jealous.
He could not stand Shannon moving on with her life without him.
The morning of December 1st, 2011, Clay asked Shannon to drive the children to school on the pretense that his car broke down. While she was gone, Clay went to her house to wait for her return.
He waited for his opportunity, and when he saw it, he went for it.
Clay, what the hell are you doing here? Sick of you.
As Clay attempted to subdue Shannon with a taser, she fought back.
She gets her phone, dials 911.
But the dispatcher didn't hear Shannon and believed the call was accidental.
She was then beaten, more or less tortured. After he has killed her, does 2 things. He goes into a mode of positioning her to make her look like she's some kind of a loose woman.
I believe that he killed her and he posed her after looking at texts from Tom to mimic what Tom had asked her to pose like.
Nobody deserves to die like Shannon died.
And finally, Clay sent messages from Shannon's phone throughout the day, laid it near her body in a ploy to make it seem as though she was still alive and throw investigators off his trail. In May 2013, Clay Starbuck's trial begins in Spokane. The prosecution points to Clay's troubled history with Shannon.
Basically, the case against Clay is that he's a jealous, kind of protective guy, and he would do whatever he had to do to keep somebody else from getting his ex-wife. Here's a guy that can't get what he wants. He's been kicked to the curb twice by Shannon, and it ain't gonna happen again.
Along with the video evidence that shows Clay lied and the DNA from the scene, it's a compelling case. But the defense counters that the evidence against Clay is inconclusive.
All along, the defense team for Clay Starbuck said, of course, Clay's DNA is going to be on his ex-wife's body. Of course, Clay's DNA is going to be on the home that he had once lived in.
And they suggest there's something the prosecution missed when they looked into Shannon's online relationships. By the end of the trial, Clay and Shannon's children have come round to his side, but Shannon's mother and her siblings are convinced of Clay's guilt.
We were told that you could never predict a jury. We were all nervous. Everyone was nervous.
On June 4th, 2013, the jury sides with the prosecution, and Clay Starbuck is convicted of first-degree murder. When the verdict is read, Clay is stoic.
He had a very straight, stern face when the jury read the verdict.
Nobody deserves to be taken away from their kids, their mom, their life. She had a life. She was a good person. She would give you the shirt off her back if she could.
She was a wonderful person. She was a great mom. She always had this smile, just seemed to brighten up the room. She glowed. She glowed.
There is a profound and often unspoken weight attached to the concept of returning home. For many who leave the isolated shores of their birth to seek glory, wealth, or simple survival in the vastness of the outside world, home becomes a sanctuary of the mind. It is the quiet harbor waiting at the end of a long, exhausting voyage. It is the place where the deafening roar of foreign crowds fades into the familiar rhythm of the ocean tide. But sometimes, the very soil that nurtured a person, the very community that celebrated their triumphs from thousands of miles away, harbors a darkness that remains unseen until it is entirely too late. The sanctuary becomes a trap. The homecoming transforms into a tragedy. This is the reality that descended upon the remote islands of American Samoa, an unincorporated territory of the United States situated deep in the heart of the South Pacific Ocean. It is a place characterized by its breathtaking natural beauty, its deep-rooted cultural traditions, and its geographic isolation. Surrounded by endless expanses of blue water, the island is a closed ecosystem, not just ecologically, but socially and culturally. In such a tightly knit society, where almost everyone is connected by bloodlines, marriages, or lifelong associations, a crime of absolute brutality does not just harm a victim and their immediate family. It fractures the very foundation of the community. It forces a society to look inward and confront the terrifying realization that the monsters do not always arrive on ships from distant lands. Sometimes, they are born from the very same earth, bound by the very same traditions, and driven to unspeakable violence by the very soil beneath their feet. To truly comprehend the magnitude of the tragedy that unfolded on the evening of February the 10th, 1990, it is essential to first understand the towering figure at the center of it all. He was not merely a citizen of American Samoa. He was its absolute pride, its golden sun, and arguably its most precious living treasure. His name was Tony Saleda. In a territory where opportunities were often as limited as the landmass itself, Saleda achieved the impossible. He possessed an extraordinary athletic gift, a natural talent for baseball that defied the statistical improbabilities of his origins. Through sheer willpower, relentless dedication, and an unyielding commitment to his craft, he managed to transcend the boundaries of his small island home and step onto the grandest stages of international sports. He holds the singular, historic distinction of being the only person from American Samoa to ever break in a Major League Baseball in the United States. He did not merely make a fleeting appearance. He forged a formidable career, standing shoulder to shoulder with the greatest athletes in the world. He wore the prestigious uniforms of the Kansas City Royals, the California Angels, and the Toronto Blue Jays. His journey then took him across the Pacific once more, where he achieved magnificent stardom in Japan, playing brilliantly for the Nippon Ham Fighters. For a young boy from the islands, this trajectory was nothing short of a modern myth. Every time he stepped up to the plate, whether under the blinding stadium lights of an American metropolis or in the disciplined, high-pressure arenas of Tokyo, he carried the invisible weight of his entire homeland on his shoulders. He was the living, breathing proof that greatness could emerge from the remote Pacific. When a man achieves such monumental success, accumulating international fame and the substantial financial rewards that accompany a top-tier professional athletic career, the expected narrative often dictates that he remains in the sprawling, luxurious environments of his adopted countries. Many would have chosen to retire in a sprawling estate in California, or perhaps remain in Japan, where he was revered. But Tony Saleta was fundamentally different. The connection he felt to his roots was unbreakable. His vision of success was not defined by personal accumulation, but by collective upliftment. In 1986, after a phenomenal international career, he made the deliberate and profound decision to retire and return permanently to Pago Pago, the capital of American Samoa. He did not return to isolate himself in a mansion upon a hill, removed from the struggles of everyday islanders. Instead, he plunged directly back into the heart of his community. He dedicated his life, his energy, and his resources to the people who had cheered for him from afar. He took up a position working for the local government, applying his modern perspectives and global experiences to help develop his homeland. More importantly, he returned to the diamond, not as a superstar, but as a mentor. He poured his passion into establishing and organizing baseball leagues for the youth. He spent countless hours under the hot Samoan sun, personally coaching children from impoverished backgrounds. He saw the potential in every child holding a bat, knowing intimately that sports could provide a vital pathway out of poverty and a shield against the negative influences that so often plague marginalized communities. He was an approachable hero, a man who had conquered the world, but still had the time to teach a local child how to properly field a ground ball. He embodied the ultimate fusion of modern achievement and traditional community service. He was the living manifestation of a successful son returning to enrich the soil from which he grew. Yet this very soil, this land that he loved so deeply, would ultimately become the catalyst for his violent destruction. To understand why a beloved national icon would be gunned down in cold blood on a quiet island street, one must delve into the complex, ancient, and deeply emotional relationship that Samoans have with their land. In American Samoa, land is not merely a commodity. It is not real estate to be bought, sold, and traded in the casual manner of modern capitalism. Land is identity. It is history. It is the physical embodiment of the ancestors and the sacred inheritance of the future generations. The territory operates under a unique dual system where modern United States federal and territorial laws exist in a perpetual, uneasy tension with FA Samoa, the traditional Samoan way of life. The most critical component of this traditional system is the concept of communal land. An overwhelming majority, more than 90% of the land in American Samoa, is communally owned by large extended families, known as agas. These vast family networks are led by designated chiefs, or matais. The matai holds the profound responsibility of managing the communal land, making decisions about who can build on it, who can farm it, and how it is to be utilized for the benefit of the entire family. Because land is so scarce on the small volcanic islands, and because it holds such immense spiritual and cultural significance, disputes over boundaries, inheritance, and usage rights are common, fiercely contested, and deeply personal. It is a system that preserves the cultural integrity of the Samoan people, shielding them from the aggressive land acquisitions by outsiders that have devastated other indigenous populations. However, it is also a system that can breed intense, localized resentment. The overlapping jurisdictions of modern American courts and traditional village councils often create prolonged, agonizing legal gray areas. These disputes can simmer for years, passing down through generations like a toxic inheritance, occasionally erupting into bitter, irreconcilable conflicts between neighbors, distant relatives, and community members. Tony Saleda found himself unwittingly entangled in one of these volatile disputes. Following his return, he possessed lawful, inherited rights to certain parcels of land situated in the town of Tafuna. Tafuna was not just any location. It was the fastest-growing economic center on the island, a place where traditional landscapes were rapidly intersecting with modern development and commercial potential. Land in Tafuna was becoming increasingly valuable, both financially and symbolically. Saleda, approaching the management of his property with the same diligence he applied to his career, sought to utilize his legally inherited land. However, this assertion of his rights brought him into direct and fatal conflict with another local man, a resident named Kwasi Tufele. Tufele harbored a deep-seated, obsessive conviction that a portion of the land Saleda claimed rightfully belonged to his own family lineage. Tufele represented a stark, devastating contrast to Saleda. While Saleda had traveled the globe, absorbing modern perspectives and returning with a vision of progress and youth development, Tufele remained deeply entrenched in a rigid, perhaps distorted interpretation of traditional entitlement. For Tufele, this was not a matter that could be resolved through civilized mediation, compromise, or the objective rulings of a modern court. In his mind, it was an existential threat to his family's honor and heritage. The dispute between the returning hero and the aggrieved local did not materialize overnight. It was a slow, agonizing accumulation of tension. It manifested in heated arguments, aggressive confrontations, and a continuous, simmering hostility that poisoned the atmosphere of the community. For months, the threats and arguments escalated. Saleda, a man of immense physical stature and psychological resilience, having faced down the most intimidating pitchers in professional baseball, was not a man easily frightened. He stood his ground, relying on the legality of his claims and his standing within the community, perhaps underestimating the depth of the darkness taking root in Tufele's mind. The situation perfectly encapsulates the tragic irony that would define the case. Saleda had survived the grueling, hyper-competitive environments of the poorest urban centers during his early minor league days in America. He had navigated the immense pressures of international fame. He had overcome cultural barriers, language barriers, and the sheer statistical odds of his profession. He had traversed the globe and returned to his tranquil island home, a place he inherently trusted, completely unaware that his ultimate downfall would not come from an external adversary, but from a fellow countryman. The conflict over a few square meters of dirt was slowly transforming a localized disagreement into a profound, fatal obsession. The island, which had celebrated his every home run and cheered his every victory, was now quietly setting the stage for his execution. As the calendar turned to the year 1990, the invisible pressure gauge on this land dispute was reaching its absolute limit. The juxtaposition was striking and deeply unsettling. On one side, the radiant aura of a modern, generous, globally celebrated athlete dedicating his twilight years to the children of the island. On the other side, the brooding, extreme, and violent manifestation of an archaic mindset, fixated on possession and driven by an uncontrollable, festering resentment. This inevitable collision between the bright future Saleda represented and the dark, unyielding past Tufele embodied was careening toward a violent resolution. The community, perhaps accustomed to the loud but usually non-lethal nature of local land disputes, failed to recognize the lethal intent building within Tufele. They watched the arguments unfold, unaware that they were witnessing the prologue to an assassination. The evening of February the 10th would begin like any other warm, humid night in Tafuna, with the sounds of the ocean in the distance and the quiet hum of island life, completely obscuring the horrific, premeditated act of brutality that was about to echo through the streets and shatter the soul of American Samoa forever. To truly grasp the catastrophic nature of the events that were about to unfold, one must first construct a meticulous and comprehensive portrait of the man who stood at the center of this tragedy, as well as the profoundly complex, highly insulated environment that shaped his destiny. American Samoa is a place where the atmosphere is thick not only with the tropical, oppressive humidity of the South Pacific, but with the dense, inescapable weight of ancient tradition. To understand the victim of this terrible crime, Tony Saleda, one must look far beyond the impressive statistics printed on the back of his professional baseball cards. He was a man who possessed a physical and spiritual presence as towering as his international reputation. When he officially retired from professional baseball in 1986, he had already lived a lifetime of high-stakes competition and unimaginable pressure. He had faced down the fastest, most intimidating pitchers in the world while wearing the prestigious uniforms of the Kansas City Royals, the California Angels, and the Toronto Blue Jays. He had journeyed across the globe to Japan, immersing himself in a completely different, highly disciplined sporting culture, and finding spectacular, enduring success with the Nippon Ham Fighters. By all conventional Western metrics of professional sports, he had achieved the ultimate pinnacle. He had secured lasting financial stability, global fame, and a legacy that most athletes originating from small, isolated territories only dream of. Yet, the most remarkable and ultimately tragic chapter of his life was not written under the blinding stadium lights of massive foreign metropolises, but upon the dusty, uneven playing fields of his secluded homeland. Upon returning to Pago Pago, the capital of American Samoa, Saleda actively rejected the isolated, luxurious lifestyle that his wealth and success could have easily afforded him anywhere else in the world. He chose instead to plunge his hands directly back into the volcanic soil of his island. He took on a demanding administrative role within the local territorial government, utilizing his worldly experience, his broad perspective, and his organizational skills to directly improve the daily lives and the future prospects of his fellow citizens. But his true passion, the noble endeavor that permanently cemented his status as a living saint and a beloved national hero among the islanders, was his absolute, unwavering dedication to the youth. He spent his days tirelessly organizing comprehensive baseball tournaments, providing much-needed structure, discipline, and a sense of hope to children from the most impoverished backgrounds on the island. He could constantly be found in the intense, unforgiving afternoon heat, a physical giant among children, patiently demonstrating the complex mechanics of a baseball swing or the proper, disciplined way to field a difficult ground ball. He was not merely teaching a sport to these children. He was actively transferring his own profound resilience to the next generation, proving to them through his very existence and his daily presence that the severe geographic isolation of American Samoa was not an insurmountable barrier to global greatness. He was the ultimate, living symbol of the triumphant return, a man who had successfully conquered the outside world and brought his hard-earned trophies and his invaluable knowledge home to share unconditionally with his people. However, the very same environment that revered him as a national treasure also harbored ancient, deeply intricate systems of power, hierarchy, and possession that were fundamentally incompatible with the straightforward, meritocratic world of professional sports that Saleda knew so intimately. At the very core of this unfolding tragedy lies the profound, complex, and often misunderstood concept of land ownership in the territory of Samoa. The island operates under a deeply entrenched, centuries-old cultural system known as the Matai system, and the data surrounding it is stark, rigid, and telling. More than 90% of the available land mass in American Samoa is communal land. It is absolutely not a commodity to be casually bought, sold, or traded on an open, commercial real estate market in the Western capitalist sense. Instead, it is inextricably tied to the expansive, intricate networks of extended family units, managed, distributed, and strictly governed by the designated family chiefs or matais. In this specific cultural paradigm, land is far more than mere dirt, rock, and vegetation. It is the literal and spiritual foundation of a family's entire identity. It is the sacred resting place of their ancient ancestors and the only tangible guarantee of survival for their future descendants. To possess and control land is to possess dignity, honor, and a rightful, respected place within the rigid social hierarchy of the island. Conversely, to lose land or to have one's historical claim to a piece of land legally challenged is perceived not as a mere financial loss, but as a direct, existential attack on the bloodline itself. This traditional framework, originally designed to protect the vulnerable indigenous population from aggressive outside exploitation, frequently and disastrously collides with the modern, bureaucratic legal structures of the United States that also govern the territory. The constant intersection of these two entirely different worlds creates vast, shadowy legal gray areas. Disputes over boundary lines, inheritance rights, and historical ancestral claims can linger unresolved for decades, passing from one generation to the next like a slow-burning, toxic curse. These are not mere administrative disagreements handled by surveyors and lawyers. They are deeply emotional, fiercely territorial conflicts that completely consume the families involved and often tear the fabric of the community apart. It was within one of these treacherous, highly volatile legal and cultural intersections that the great Tony Saleta found himself unwittingly ensnared. Saleta held the legal, inherited rights to specific, highly desirable parcels of land located in the bustling town of Tafuna. The geographic and economic context of Tafuna at this specific point in history is absolutely crucial to understanding the immense, building pressure surrounding this particular dispute. Tafuna was not a remote, untouched patch of jungle. It was rapidly becoming the fastest-growing economic sector on the entire island. It was the epicenter of new development, a place where the quiet, traditional way of life was rapidly and forcefully giving way to modern commercial infrastructure and capitalistic enterprise. Land in Tafuna was becoming increasingly valuable with every passing day, shifting rapidly from a purely symbolic representation of ancestral heritage to a highly coveted, aggressively sought-after economic asset. Saleta, acting with the straightforward, rational logic of a modern man asserting his lawful rights, intended to fully utilize the property that he had rightfully inherited under the law. He possessed the legal documentation, he held unquestionable moral standing and respect within the community, and he had the progressive vision to participate in the economic growth of his homeland. But his lawful claim stood in direct, uncompromising opposition to the deeply held beliefs of another local resident, a man whose mindset belonged to a different era entirely, a man named Kwasi Tufele. If the celebrated Tony Saleta represented the bright, progressive, generous, and globally aware future of American Samoa, Kwasi Tufele completely embodied the dark, rigid, and intensely insular aspects of its archaic past. The psychological contrast between the two men was absolute and uncompromising, setting the perfect, terrible stage for a classic cinematic tragedy of Shakespearean proportions. Tufele was a man who appeared entirely consumed by the localized, hyper-focused politics of land and lineage. He vehemently and continuously declared to anyone who would listen that a significant portion of the land legally held and developed by Saleta actually belonged to his own family lineage. To Tufele, the modern legal documents, the land surveys, and the official governmental recognition of Saleta's ownership were completely irrelevant, representing an unjust intrusion of foreign concepts upon his ancestral rights. In his troubled mind, he was operating under a much higher, older, and purer law, driven by a deeply ingrained feudal mindset that viewed any form of compromise as an unforgivable surrender of his family's eternal honor. The inescapable fact that his adversary in this dispute was the island's most celebrated hero, a man beloved by almost everyone, only seemed to intensely amplify his bitter, festering resentment. There is a specific, potent kind of psychological poison that can infect a person when they feel their fundamental birthright is being eclipsed by someone who possesses unimaginable wealth, international fame, and universal, unquestioning adoration. Every single time Tufele saw Saleta walking confidently through the town, every time he heard the community loudly praise the generous returning athlete, it likely fueled a deep, burning, and ultimately uncontrollable sense of inadequacy and rage. He was a man slowly backing himself into a psychological corner of his own making, hyper-focused on a few square meters of developing Earth, willing to slowly tear down the island's greatest symbol of hope to satisfy his unyielding obsession. The escalation of this fatal dispute was not a sudden, unpredictable explosion, but an agonizingly slow, deeply uncomfortable deterioration of civility that stretched over many long, tense months. The conflict played out entirely in the open, within a small, interconnected island community where anonymity was physically and socially impossible. Everyone knew everyone else's business, and everyone was acutely aware of the growing dispute in Tafuna. The building tension manifested in a series of heated, bitter, and increasingly public arguments between the two men. Whenever their paths crossed, the previously relaxed island atmosphere would immediately curdle into hostility. Saleda, possessing the immense physical stature of a professional power hitter and the unyielding, quiet confidence of a man who had successfully faced the highest levels of global pressure, completely refused to be intimidated by Tufeli's aggressive posturing. He stood his ground firmly and resolutely, relying heavily on the indisputable legality of his position and his own rational, modern worldview. He simply could not fathom that a straightforward disagreement over property lines, something that in the United States mainland would be handled quietly by civil lawyers in a sterile courtroom, could spiral into genuine, life-threatening barbarism. He engaged in these verbal altercations with the inherent expectation that reason, logic, or at the very least, the territorial law, would eventually prevail and settle the matter peacefully. He did not realize, and tragically could not have known, that he was attempting to logically reason with a man who had entirely abandoned all rationality in favor of absolute fanaticism. As the months dragged on toward the beginning of 1990, the verbal sparring grew increasingly volatile and dangerous. The quiet, concerned whispers among the townspeople of Tafuna slowly turned into a collective, underlying anxiety that permeated the daily life of the area. The community watched helplessly as an unstoppable force met an immovable, deeply disturbed object. Tufeli's rhetoric became substantially more aggressive, his public demeanor more erratic, and his subtle threats more pronounced. He was no longer just a local man disputing a property line. He was a man entirely consumed by a singular, destructive purpose that overshadowed everything else in his life. The intense, localized dispute had stripped away all his other social identities until he was functioning as nothing but a hollow vessel for pure vengeance. Saleda, ever the optimist and perhaps blinded by his own benevolent intentions, continued his vital work with the government and his daily coaching of the impoverished youth, perhaps deliberately ignoring the dark storm clouds gathering directly above him. He believed fundamentally in the inherent goodness of his people and trusted implicitly in the protective blanket of his legal rights as an American citizen. He could not see that the very island he had returned to serve, the land he loved more than anywhere else on Earth, was simultaneously providing the motive, the weapon, and the executioner. The psychological pressure inside this tiny, oceanic microcosm was building to an intolerable, explosive level, creating a stifling, claustrophobic dread that seemed to hang heavy over the streets of Tafuna. The tragic stage was now meticulously and perfectly set. The brilliant, modern hero and the dark, resentful antagonist were permanently locked into a fatal orbit, completely isolated from the intervention of the outside world, bound inextricably together by the cursed soil of their ancestors, inexorably moving toward a humid night of horrific violence that would shatter the peace of the Pacific and permanently alter the history of the island forever. The evening of February 10th, 1990, began with a deceptive, tropical serenity in the rapidly expanding town of Tafuna, a deceptive calm that masked the chilling, premeditated violence brewing just beneath the surface of the island's nocturnal life. The sun had long since dipped beneath the horizon, casting long, encroaching shadows over the volcanic landscape, while the familiar, rhythmic pulse of the Pacific surf provided a constant, indifferent backdrop to the unfolding tragedy. Tony Saleda, the man who had become a living bridge between the traditional culture of his ancestors and the hyper-competitive world of American Major League sports, was moving through the familiar streets of his own neighborhood, completely unaware that his life was about to be extinguished. He possessed the physical stature of a warrior, built through years of swinging bats at high-velocity pitches, and the unyielding, quiet confidence of a man who had stared down the best pitchers in the world. He was a man who operated with the assumption that life, even when complicated by legal disputes and land disagreements, followed a certain code of conduct, a set of rules that could be negotiated, debated, and ultimately resolved. He did not realize that the shadow following him through the humid, darkened streets of Tijuana had no interest in negotiation, no interest in law, and no interest in the future of the community that Saleda was so desperately trying to build. Kwasi Tufele, the man who had allowed his mind to be entirely colonized by an obsessive, destructive fixation on a few square meters of land, had spent the preceding days and hours carefully orchestrating the final, brutal act of his long-simmering resentment. He was no longer a person acting in the heat of a momentary argument. He had moved into a state of cold, calculated, and terrifyingly focused intent. He carried with him a weapon, a firearm that served as the final, violent punctuation mark to a conflict he was entirely incapable of winning through civil discourse. As he shadowed Saleda, he was not just tracking an adversary. He was tracking the embodiment of everything he felt he had been denied, everything that mocked his own existence through its mere success and public acclaim. The encounter was not an accident. It was a scheduled intersection of two lives that had become fundamentally incompatible. When Tufele finally emerged from the darkness to intercept Saleda, the atmosphere in the isolated corner of Tijuana underwent an instant, violent transformation. The usual, gentle hum of the island night was replaced by the sudden, sharp, and unmistakably hostile intent of a man who had crossed the final threshold of his humanity. The confrontation that followed was brief, chaotic, and profoundly uneven in its nature, as it was a clash between two fundamentally different realities. Tufele, fueled by a toxic, long-gestating rage that had stripped away his social inhibitions, immediately confronted Saleda to demand what he felt was his birthright, an ultimatum framed in the language of ancestral ownership that Saleda had been fighting to resolve through the official, legal channels of the territory. Despite the immense physical presence of the former baseball star, Saleda was not a man of violence. Even in the face of such aggressive, overt hostility, he stood his ground with the same calm, resolute dignity that had defined his athletic career. He attempted to engage, to speak, to perhaps reason with a man he had seen frequently around the town, never imagining that the argument had long since surpassed the point of verbal resolution. This moment represents the heartbreaking tragedy of the hero who refuses to acknowledge that the rules of his world have been discarded by his adversary. Saleda, a man who had faced the terrifying speed of professional baseball without flinching, stood firmly before the man who was currently holding his life in his hands. He did not back down, not because he was arrogant, but because he believed in the legitimacy of his standing and the inherent, peaceful nature of his community, a belief that would prove to be the most fatal miscalculation of his life. In that moment of intense, high-stakes psychological friction, Tufele reached the absolute limit of his fragile, obsessed mind. The rejection of his demands, the sheer physical imposition of Saleda's presence, and the crushing weight of his own perceived inadequacy all coalesced into an explosive, uncontrollable impulse. With a suddenness that defied the stillness of the night, Tufele drew his firearm and discharged it directly at Saleda. The sound of the gunshot was a deafening, unnatural intrusion upon the peaceful island environment, a shockwave that would reverberate through the history of the entire territory. Saleda, caught completely by surprise by the sudden escalation from verbal hostility to lethal force, was struck instantly. He stumbled, the sheer force of the projectile and the shock of the assault sending him toward the ground. He was a titan among men, a physical specimen who had endured the rigorous demands of professional athletics. Yet he was utterly defenseless against the cold, mechanical cruelty of the weapon Tufeli had brought to their disagreement. As he collapsed onto the unforgiving earth of Tafuna, the very land that had been the subject of so much strife, the reality of the situation became clear. This was not a dispute. It was an execution. The horror of the act did not end with the first shot. Driven by an insatiable, savage need to ensure the total destruction of his enemy, Tufeli did not flee or panic after the first, incapacitating hit. Instead, he maintained his cold, calculated focus, stepping closer to the fallen icon of the island. He continued to discharge his firearm, emptying his weapon into the body of the man who had given so much back to his community. It was a calculated, deliberate, and profoundly intimate act of violence, a total rejection of the value of the human life he was extinguishing. He fired multiple rounds at close range, ensuring that there was no possibility of survival for his victim. The sound of those subsequent shots, ringing out in the near-total silence of the dark neighborhood, was a gruesome testament to the total abandonment of mercy, logic, and morality. Every trigger pull was an assertion of his own twisted, delusional power, an attempt to permanently erase the threat he perceived in Saleda's very existence. The man who had been the idol of thousands, the teacher of impoverished children, and the pride of an entire nation, was being systematically dismantled by the singular, festering obsession of one individual. The scene was one of absolute, chilling isolation, a private massacre played out in the dark, where the only audience was the uncaring night. Once the final shot had been fired and the silence of the night began to slowly settle back over the area, the reality of what had occurred became terrifyingly apparent. Tufeli stood over the broken, lifeless form of Tony Saleda, the man who had traveled the world only to be destroyed on his own doorstep. The contrast was as brutal as it was absolute. On the ground lay a hero, a man of immense potential and demonstrated generosity, his life snuffed out in a matter of seconds. Standing over him was a man whose entire existence had been narrowed down to a single, violent act of reclamation, a man who now had nothing left but the crime he had just committed. Having ensured the death of his victim, Tufeli did not hesitate or look back. He turned away from the body with a chilling, detached calmness, demonstrating a terrifying lack of remorse or confusion. He left the scene of his atrocity as if he had merely finished an errand, walking away from the cooling, blood-stained earth of Tafuna into the darkness, leaving the body of the island's most precious treasure to be discovered by the community he had served so selflessly. The aftermath of the shooting began with a deafening, stunned silence before the reality of the tragedy slowly rippled through the close-knit population of the island. The sound of the gunfire, although occurring in a secluded spot, had been heard, and the discovery of Saleda's body was a traumatic, shattering event that defied belief. For the residents of American Samoa, the news was not just that a prominent citizen had died. It was the terrifying realization that their world had been fundamentally compromised. The man who represented their greatest triumph, their hope, and their shared identity had been brutally slaughtered in their own backyard. The immediate reaction was a chaotic, visceral mix of grief, disbelief, and mounting, intense rage. The isolation that usually protected their community from the chaos of the outside world had suddenly turned into a cage in which they were forced to confront the presence of a cold-blooded killer. The police in American Samoa, usually occupied with the administrative management of a peaceful, tightly knit population, were suddenly confronted with the most significant, high-profile, and emotionally charged investigation in the history of their territory. The pressure to apprehend the individual responsible was immense, as the community demanded justice for a man who had embodied the best of their nation. Every person in the territory felt the loss, and every person was looking to their law enforcement to restore the order that had been shattered so violently by the actions of a single, obsessed man. The investigation, which would soon be characterized by the rapid apprehension of Tufeli, was not just a pursuit of a suspect. It was the beginning of an attempt to heal a nation that had just lost its heart to the darkness of its own soil. The stage had been set, the act performed, and the consequences, while still unfolding, would leave a scar on the collective memory of the island that would never truly fade, a permanent reminder of the fragile line between the pride of a community and the depths of human depravity. The immediate aftermath of the brutal murder of Tony Saleta triggered an unprecedented sequence of events within the borders of American Samoa, a territory that had never before been forced to grapple with the systematic assassination of a national hero. The vacuum left by Saleta's sudden death was not merely an emotional or social one. It was an institutional crisis. The island, usually defined by its tranquil pace and the slow, rhythmic resolution of local disputes, found itself plunged into an intense, hyper-accelerated state of shock. The news of the shooting ripped through the streets of Tafuna and radiated across the entire island in a matter of minutes, turning the usual quiet of the evening into a cacophony of confusion, mourning, and raw, burgeoning fury. For the local police force, the task before them was both agonizingly personal and monumentally professional. They were not investigating an unknown transient or a criminal from the mainland. They were searching for the man who had extinguished the light of their most celebrated citizen. The weight of this responsibility cannot be overstated, as the community looked toward the authorities not just for a routine criminal investigation, but for a restoration of the fundamental societal order that had been shattered. Within hours of the shooting, the authorities initiated a localized but highly intensive manhunt. Given the geography of the island, a small, isolated, and highly interconnected environment, the ability of an individual to successfully disappear was functionally non-existent. The police acted with a sense of urgency that reflected the public's mood, recognizing that any delay in securing the suspect could lead to vigilante justice. Witnesses who had either heard the sequence of gunshots or observed the movements of suspicious individuals in the proximity of Tafuna began to provide crucial, if fragmented, information to investigators. The process of gathering evidence was facilitated by the very nature of the community. People knew who moved in their circles, who held grievances, and who was capable of the kind of obsession that could lead to such a violent conclusion. The investigation was not hampered by a lack of clues, but rather fueled by an overwhelming abundance of leads, as a grieving population clamored to provide whatever detail they possessed to ensure the apprehension of the killer. The arrest of Kwasi Tufuli occurred within only a few hours of the crime, a rapid success that speaks to the efficiency of a community that had been mobilized by grief. When the police finally located Tufuli, the tension was palpable, yet the suspect himself provided a chilling contrast to the chaos he had unleashed. There was no desperate flight, no frantic attempts to escape the island, and no complex efforts to hide the evidence. Instead, there was a disquieting sense of resignation, as if he had anticipated that his localized, fanatical war for the land had reached its inevitable, terminal conclusion. The authorities secured the area, gathered the necessary forensic evidence from the scene, and placed Tufuli into custody, effectively ending his freedom while simultaneously starting the long, painful road toward legal accountability. The arrest did not, however, quiet the anger of the people. The knowledge that the killer was in custody did little to alleviate the trauma of having lost their hero, nor did it answer the fundamental, soul-searching questions that the community began to ask themselves. How could such a deep-seated, violent resentment flourish in their midst? How did the legal system, meant to mediate their disputes, fail so catastrophically that it allowed a disagreement over property lines to escalate to murder? The investigative process now shifted from the streets of Tafuna to the sterile, high-pressure environment of the legal system. The detectives assigned to the case were required to meticulously reconstruct the events of February 10th, ensuring that every detail, from the months of prior arguments to the final, fatal shots, was documented with absolute, forensic precision. This was necessary because the defense was expected to challenge the nature of the crime, potentially attempting to frame the murder as an act of impulsive passion rather than a premeditated execution. The prosecution, representing the state of American Samoa, was burdened with the task of proving not just the act of killing, but the intent behind it. They scoured the history of the relationship between Saleda and Tufali, documenting the escalating threats, the persistent harassment, and the cold, unyielding nature of Tufali's obsession with the land. Every argument, every public confrontation, and every recorded instance of hostility was analyzed to paint a comprehensive picture of a man who had systematically crossed the line from a disgruntled citizen into a predatory killer. As the investigators pieced together the evidence, they were also forced to confront the systemic failures of the land dispute resolution process. It became increasingly clear that the murder of Tony Saleda was not an isolated incident caused by a single deranged individual, but the violent manifestation of a much larger, structural issue that had been neglected for years. The authorities began to document how the overlap between the Matai tradition and American legal standards had created a vacuum of authority, a space where men like Tufali could convince themselves that they were above the law, operating under an older, more violent set of entitlements. The investigators interviewed dozens of people, neighbors, family members, and local leaders, who all described a growing sense of dread that had permeated the area surrounding the disputed land in Tafuna. The narrative began to emerge. This was a death foretold by the community, a tragedy that everyone saw coming, but no one possessed the mechanism to stop. This realization placed an immense burden on the police, who were not only investigating a crime, but were also forced to participate in the difficult task of diagnosing the sickness within their own society. The evidence-gathering phase was a period of intense public scrutiny, during which the reputation of the victim was further solidified, even as his death was meticulously picked apart by the machinery of the law. The forensic evidence, the firearm recovered, the ballistic reports, the testimonies of those who heard the shots, was assembled to present a case that was legally unassailable. The prosecution worked tirelessly to ensure that there was no room for the defense to suggest that Saleda had played any role in his own demise or that the violence was anything other than a one-sided, cold-blooded act of aggression. They focused heavily on the premeditation aspect, highlighting the fact that Tufali arrived at the scene with a loaded weapon, prepared to kill, which directly countered any potential claims of heat-of-the-moment provocation. This distinction was critical. If they could prove premeditation, the case for first-degree murder would be ironclad, leaving no legal avenues for the defense to reduce the severity of the charges. Throughout this period, the legal professionals also had to navigate the intense, emotional pressure exerted by the public. The community was not merely watching the investigation. They were actively demanding that justice be served in a way that acknowledged the gravity of the loss. The court system in American Samoa, usually a quiet venue for territorial law, suddenly became the center of the world for the islanders. They watched as the detectives, prosecutors, and forensic experts worked through the nights, fueled by the same grief that haunted every home. The investigation was not just about finding a killer. It was about defining what the territory stood for. Would they allow the law of the jungle to prevail, or would they reaffirm the rule of law and the sanctity of human life? This question hovered over every interview, every piece of evidence cataloged, and every motion filed by the court. The investigation became a cathartic, agonizing process of community introspection, a necessary step in transitioning from the initial trauma of the murder to the eventual process of formal adjudication. By the time the evidence was fully compiled and the case was ready for the High Court, it was clear that the state had constructed an airtight narrative. The investigation had successfully stripped away the complex, traditional, and land-focused rationalizations that Tufali might have attempted to use, exposing the brutal, criminal core of his actions. He had pursued a man, he had confronted that man, and he had executed that man. There was no ambiguity, no doubt, and no alternative interpretation of the facts. The meticulous nature of the investigation served to honor the memory of the victim by ensuring that his killer would not be able to obscure the truth with lies or historical grievances. As the documents were filed and the trial dates were set, the investigative phase concluded, leaving a legacy of thoroughness and dedication that would serve as the foundation for the ultimate judgment. The work of the police and the prosecutors had not just prepared a criminal case. It had provided the people of American Samoa with the certainty that they needed to begin the long, slow, and difficult process of saying goodbye to the hero who had been so cruelly taken from them. The investigation had successfully navigated the complexities of their unique island culture, cutting through the traditions and the customs to arrive at the cold, hard reality of a murder that had left the entire territory forever changed. The state of American Samoa was now prepared to face the final legal reckoning, standing before the judge and jury with the full weight of the truth in their hands, demanding that justice, however imperfect it might be fully rendered in the name of Tony Saleta. The legal proceeding against Kwasi Tufuli in the High Court of American Samoa was destined to be more than a simple criminal trial. It was a profound confrontation between the values of the modern, rule-based society the island aspired to be and the destructive, archaic impulses that had led to the murder of Tony Saleta. As the proceedings commenced, the courtroom in Fagatogo became a somber arena where the reality of the tragedy was meticulously dissected before the eyes of a shell-shocked public. The atmosphere within the courtroom was suffocating, thick with the weight of communal grief and the intense, palpable desire for a justice that felt commensurate with the magnitude of the loss. The prosecution, fully prepared by the exhaustive work of the investigators, entered the trial with the clear, unwavering goal of establishing that the killing of Saleta was not a spontaneous outburst of anger, but a calculated, premeditated, and fundamentally criminal act. Their argument was built upon the bedrock of the evidence collected in the immediate aftermath of the shooting, focusing on the intent that Tufuli demonstrated by arming himself and seeking out the victim. For the prosecution, the narrative was direct and unyielding. They framed the act as a first-degree murder, emphasizing that the months of prior conflict, the documented threats, and the specific circumstances of the encounter in Tafuna all pointed toward a man who had made a conscious decision to end another human being's life. They methodically presented the testimony of witnesses who had observed the escalating tensions, effectively painting a portrait of Tufuli as a man whose obsession had gradually eroded his moral center until only violence remained. By focusing on the cold, methodical way in which Tufuli executed his plan, the prosecution sought to invalidate any defense that might attempt to portray him as a victim of circumstance or emotional turmoil. They argued that regardless of the complexities surrounding the land dispute, there is absolutely no legal or moral justification for the path of violence that Tufuli chose. The presence of the firearm was the most damning physical evidence, a tangible manifestation of intent that the defense struggled to contextualize in any way that would mitigate the severity of the charge. On the other side of the courtroom, the defense faced an incredibly difficult task. Attempting to navigate a system that demanded accountability, they tried to pivot the focus toward the emotional and cultural pressures that had shaped Tufuli's state of mind. They argued that the defendant was not acting with the cool, calculated rationality that the prosecution described, but was instead operating under a state of extreme psychological distress, provoked by a lifetime of systemic pressures and the perceived theft of his family's ancestral heritage. They leaned heavily into the cultural context, hoping that the court might acknowledge the profound, almost existential, weight that land claims carry within the Samoan community. The defense attempted to suggest that the killing was an act of momentary, explosive insanity, a byproduct of a man whose world had collapsed under the stress of an unresolved conflict. They hoped to shift the focus from the act of murder to the environment that facilitated such intense, localized hostility, essentially arguing that Tufuli was a broken vessel in a broken system. However, as the trial unfolded, these arguments failed to gain traction against the stark, indisputable reality of the facts. The prosecution's evidence was simply too comprehensive to be ignored. When the details of the shooting were presented, the multiple shots fired at close range, the lack of hesitation or remorse shown by the defendant, and his cold, detached departure from the scene, it became impossible for the defense to effectively argue that this was a crime of sudden, uncontrollable passion. The court remained focused on the deliberate nature of the actions. The prosecution effectively demonstrated that Tuffley had crossed a threshold from the emotional frustration of a land dispute into the cold-blooded territory of homicide, and that he had done so with a full awareness of the potential consequences. The judge and the jury were presented with a clear dichotomy: a hero who had returned to build his community versus a man who had chosen to destroy the hero to satisfy an ego-driven, archaic obsession. The testimony during the trial was a harrowing experience for the observers, as it forced them to relive the night of the murder through the accounts of those who had witnessed the breakdown of order in Tafuna. For the family of Tony Saleta and the community at large, the trial served as a grim confirmation of the loss they had suffered. Every detail provided by the prosecution reinforced the senselessness of the murder, further cementing the public's desire for the harshest possible penalty. The court had to act as a barrier against the public's rage, ensuring that the trial remained focused on the legal facts. It was clear that the proceedings were also a collective mourning process. The defense's attempts to inject nuance into the situation were often met with skepticism, as the sheer brutality of the act seemed to override any societal excuses that might have been offered in a different context. The trial reached its zenith during the closing arguments, where the prosecution framed the murder as a direct attack on the future of the island, asserting that to permit anything less than the maximum penalty would be a failure of the territory to protect its most valued citizens. Ultimately, the verdict delivered by the court was a resounding affirmation of the rule of law. Kwasi Tuffley was found guilty of first-degree murder, a decision that brought a sense of grim, necessary finality to the legal process. The sentencing phase was equally somber, reflecting the gravity of the crime and the need to send a clear, unequivocal message to the territory. The judge, in delivering the sentence, emphasized the absolute necessity of maintaining a society where disputes are settled by due process rather than violence. Tuffley was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, an outcome that accurately mirrored the severity of his actions and the irreversible nature of the harm he had caused. The sentencing was not merely an act of punishment. It was a declaration that the life of a hero like Tony Saleta carried an immeasurable value that the law was obligated to protect and avenge. The aftermath of the sentencing brought a significant, if difficult, chapter to a close. The realization that the killer would never again walk free provided a measure of relief to a community that had lived in fear and grief since that night in February. However, the legal resolution of the case did not end the trauma for the people of American Samoa. The realization that their national hero had been taken by one of their own in a dispute over property was a wound that required more than a prison sentence to heal. The authorities, acting out of a desire to prioritize the safety of the incarcerated and to prevent any further escalation of tensions, made the decision to transfer Tuffley to a maximum security facility located in the United States mainland. This move was underscored by genuine concern that the level of public animosity toward the defendant was so extreme that it could lead to attempts at retribution within the island's own correctional system. The removal of the murderer from the territory marked the final, practical step in the legal and administrative management of the case. It signaled the end of Tuffley's influence within the community and allowed the focus to finally shift away from his persona. The court had done its duty. The law had been applied, and justice, at least in the eyes of the legal system, had been served. Yet, for those who had sat in the courtroom and watched the entire ordeal unfold, there remained a haunting sense of what could have been. The trial had been a mirror held up to the community, reflecting the tensions and the contradictions that had existed beneath the surface for so long. As the courtroom doors closed for the final time on the case of the government against Kwasi Tuffley, the people of American Samoa were left to process the reality of their loss. They had seen the best and the worst of their society laid bare in the testimony of the witnesses and the arguments of the attorneys. The trial was the conclusion of a legal process, but it was merely the beginning of a long period of reflection for a people who had learned, in most painful way imaginable, that the greatest threats to their peace did not always come from the outside world, but could be nurtured within the very soil they called home. The The legacy of the trial would remain as a testament to the fact that, regardless of how deep the traditions or how ancient the grievances, the rule of law must remain the final arbiter of justice in their society, even when the cost of that lesson was the life of the most precious son the island had ever known. The aftermath of the legal proceedings and the final incarceration of Kwasi Tufuli left an indelible, haunting scar upon the social and cultural landscape of American Samoa. The death of Tony Saleda was not merely the loss of a prominent citizen. It was the premature extinction of a beacon of hope, a man whose life served as a rare, tangible link between the isolated traditionalism of the islands and the expansive potential of the global stage. As the shock of the crime began to transition into a sustained, collective mourning, the community was forced to grapple with the profound and deeply uncomfortable questions that this tragedy had laid bare. The central reflection for the people of the territory became a painful assessment of how their society, which prided itself on close-knit kinship and historical continuity, had allowed a trivial, albeit emotionally charged, dispute over land to escalate into a cold-blooded assassination. The murder acted as a dark mirror, reflecting the dangerous intersection of archaic, feudal concepts of entitlement and the rapidly changing, modern legal requirements of an unincorporated United States territory. The loss of Saleda was a blow that reverberated through every village and every family on the island, primarily because he had represented the promise of a future that did not necessitate the abandonment of one's cultural heritage. By returning to his homeland after achieving monumental success abroad, he had provided a blueprint for how a Samoan could compete on the world stage while simultaneously remaining deeply rooted in the communal life of his people. His daily dedication to the youth, the hours spent on the dusty, sun-baked baseball fields of Tafuna, was not just a leisure activity. It was a deliberate investment in the next generation. The fact that the very children he coached were the ones who had to witness the disintegration of his life at the hands of a local resident created a cycle of trauma that would affect the community for decades. This was the tragedy's most enduring consequence: the interruption of a legacy that had been designed to provide the island's children with a path away from the exact type of violent, narrow-minded obsession that ended up consuming their mentor. As the months and years passed, the reflection on this case began to evolve from raw, emotional trauma into a broader, more critical sociological discourse. The islanders were compelled to look at the persistence of the Matai system and the often volatile reality of communal land ownership with a new, sober perspective. While the tradition of collective land holding was vital for maintaining the identity of the Samoan people and preventing the wholesale displacement of families by external economic forces, the Saleda case exposed the horrific potential for this system to be weaponized by individuals driven by greed, delusion, and an inflexible refusal to adapt to modern legal dispute resolution. The tragedy served as a brutal lesson on the necessity of reinforcing the rule of law. It highlighted the urgent need for a more transparent, standardized, and enforceable mechanism for handling land disputes, one that could effectively remove the burden of conflict from the shoulders of individuals and place it firmly within the jurisdiction of objective, impartial legal institutions. The community's reflection was also characterized by a deep, lingering sense of irony regarding the location of the murder. Tafuna, the town that represented the economic progress and the future development of the island, was the site where the most reactionary and destructive elements of the past had asserted themselves with the most lethal force. This juxtaposition haunted the islanders. They saw in Saleda the potential for a modern American Samoa, progressive, connected, and prosperous, and in Tufuli, the terrifying, stagnant drag of a past that was willing to commit murder to protect its perceived entitlements. The murder became a symbol of this internal tension, a battle between the desire to step into the future and the pull of an antiquated, insular reality. The public's continued reverence for Saleda was not just an act of nostalgia. It was an act of continued resistance against the dark, violent impulses that Tufuli had come to represent. Every time a youth league tournament was held or a child took the field, it was a quiet, defiant assertion that the values of progress and communal service would eventually triumph over the legacy of the crime. Furthermore, the case sparked a profound institutional introspection within the territorial government. The realization that their own hero, a man who had worked within the government to improve the lives of others, could be left vulnerable to such an overt, long-simmering threat forced a review of how the territory managed high-profile conflicts and public safety. The lack of protection, the inability to mediate the land dispute effectively, and the failure to recognize the escalating danger until it was too late were all failures that the authorities had to internalize. This led to a gradual, if difficult, modernization of how the territory addressed violent threats and the mediation of civil disputes. The memory of Saleda served as a constant, silent benchmark against which the effectiveness of these new measures was measured. Whenever a conflict threatened to turn volatile, the name of the fallen athlete was invoked as a reminder of the price of inaction and the catastrophic results of allowing personal grievances to supersede the public peace. On a deeper, more philosophical level, the tragedy forced the people of American Samoa to reconsider the nature of their own community. The close-knit, kinship-based society that they cherished was the same society that had produced both the hero and the murderer. This was an incredibly difficult pill to swallow. It meant admitting that their traditional way of life, while offering support and identity, also provided a breeding ground for localized, intense obsessions that could, in the absence of strong, impartial institutions, lead to absolute disaster. The reflection was not an abandonment of their culture, but a maturation of it. It was an acknowledgement that for their society to survive and thrive in the modern world, it had to balance the beauty of its traditions with the necessary, rigid requirements of legal order and individual accountability. The life of Tony Saleda, which had been so dedicated to bridging these two worlds, became the model for this precarious balance. He had shown that one could be proudly Samoan and globally modern, and his death served to emphasize that this bridge was not just a luxury, but a necessity for the survival of the island's dignity. The final resting place of Tony Saleda became a site of quiet, enduring pilgrimage, a place where people would come not just to grieve, but to remember the man who had shown them that the world was larger than the islands. His legacy was not written in the cold, legalistic findings of the court, nor in the prison walls that now contained his killer. It was written in the lives of the young people he had mentored, in the development of the youth programs that continued in his name, and in the collective consciousness of a nation that refused to let his death be the defining moment of his life. The tragedy was indeed immense, but it was not the end of the story. The story became one of resilience, of a community learning to protect its best sons and daughters, and of a commitment to a future where the rule of law would ensure that no more lives would be sacrificed to the ghosts of land disputes and ancient, destructive pride. As the years continue to pass, the story of Tony Saleda serves as a permanent, cautionary tale for all who inhabit the islands of American Samoa. It is a story that speaks to the fragility of peace, the intensity of localized conflict, and the vital, protective necessity of the law. It stands as a reminder that heroes are human, and that the soil they walk upon is as much a source of danger as it is a source of strength. The legacy of the hero who returned home is now inextricably linked with the tragic circumstances of his departure, a combination that has permanently altered the identity of the territory. The people of American Samoa, having navigated the depths of this darkness, now carry the weight of that lesson with a sober, collective awareness. They understand now, with a clarity that only such a profound loss could provide, that the path to a prosperous and secure future is paved with the commitment to justice, the preservation of the rule of law, and the unwavering dedication to the education and empowerment of their youth. The memory of Tony Saleda continues to breathe in the wind that blows across the baseball diamonds of Tafuna, a persistent, quiet witness to a life well lived and a promise that the violence that claimed him will never again be allowed to dictate the destiny of his people. In this way, his legacy has become a foundation for the very future he had fought so hard to build, ensuring that even in death, he remains the most powerful, unifying force in the history of his beloved island. The final chapter of this tragic narrative is not merely an epilogue to the life of Tony Saleta, but an exploration of the enduring silence that has settled over the islands of American Samoa in the wake of such profound loss. When a nation loses its most iconic son to the senseless mechanics of a property dispute, the aftermath is measured not in the immediate shock or the subsequent legal finality, but in the slow, generational assimilation of the trauma into the collective psyche. The void created by Saleta's absence remains an open question, a persistent reminder of the fragility of progress in a place where the weight of the past is always heavy and ever-present. The community has had to learn to live in the shadow of this event, reconciling their deep, abiding love for the hero who returned with the terrifying, incomprehensible reality of the neighbor who destroyed him. This reconciliation is the true, ongoing work of the people of the territory, an effort to ensure that the memory of the man is not overshadowed by the infamy of the crime. The legacy of Tony Saleta has undergone a subtle, inevitable transmutation. He is no longer remembered just for his athletic prowess or his successful international career. He is remembered as a martyr of sorts for the modernizing values he championed. His death, which once threatened to shatter the social fabric of the islands, has instead become a rallying point for those who advocate for systemic change, legal transparency, and the peaceful resolution of conflict. The baseball fields of Tafuna, where he once stood as a mentor, have become transformed in a hallowed ground, places where the values he instilled continue to be taught to new generations, effectively keeping the essence of his purpose alive. This pedagogical commitment to his memory is the most powerful weapon the community has against the regression into the dark, violent habits of thought that motivated Tufeli. It is a persistent, quiet, and deeply effective form of defiance against the very darkness that claimed his life. In the decades following the tragedy, the institutional evolution of American Samoa has been cautious but significant. The judicial system, once perhaps ill-equipped to handle the explosive intersection of tradition and law in land disputes, has faced the necessity of constant refinement. The tragedy of February 1990 is frequently invoked in policy discussions, in the halls of the High Court, and in the deliberations of village councils as a somber reminder of the catastrophic consequences of unresolved grievance. This integration of the case into the public discourse is a vital component of the healing process. By refusing to bury the memory of the murder, the territory ensures that the lessons learned from the investigation and trial are never forgotten. It has created a society that, while still deeply respectful of its cultural roots, has become increasingly cognizant of the necessity of maintaining robust, impartial, and enforceable legal standards. The transition from a community driven by the weight of ancestral expectation to one governed by the rule of law is a slow, difficult, and imperfect process, but it is one that has been profoundly accelerated by the blood of their fallen hero. Moreover, the story of Tony Saleta has achieved a kind of mythic status that transcends the borders of American Samoa, resonating throughout the Pacific and among the diaspora communities worldwide. It is a story that speaks to the inherent tension of the post-colonial experience, the desire to return, the pressure to succeed abroad, and the danger of falling victim to the very systems one sought to improve. The narrative has been told and retold, becoming a foundational myth of the modern Pacific, serving as both an inspiration for the pursuit of excellence and a warning against the dangers of unchecked, localized resentment. For the Samoan people, the story acts as a cultural touchstone, a shared experience that defines the boundaries of what is acceptable and what must be collectively rejected. It is a testament to their resilience that they have been able to incorporate such a traumatic event into their identity, without allowing it to define them as a people of violence or despair. The silence that now surrounds the name of Kwasi Tufeli within the community is a deliberate, powerful act of collective erasure. By focusing entirely on the legacy of the victim, the people of the territory have effectively rendered the perpetrator a non-entity, a footnote in the grander, tragic history of their islands. This is a form of justice that the law could not provide, the denial of the infamy that the killer so desperately craved through his actions. Toffoli sought to define his existence by his possession of the land and his destruction of his rival. But in the end, he has been relegated to the oblivion of a distant, maximum security cell, completely divorced from the culture he claimed to be protecting. The people's focus on Saleta, on his grace, his achievement, and his service, acts as a corrective force, a way of asserting that the identity of the island is built upon the contributions of its builders, not the violent whims of its destroyers. As we look toward the future of the islands, the story of Tony Saleta remains a vital, instructive guide. It reminds us that the challenges of the future are rarely simple, and that the path to a harmonious society is never guaranteed. The tension between the traditional and the modern, between the communal and the individual, and between the history of the land and the requirements of the law, will continue to test the character of the people of American Samoa. Yet, the existence of a generation of young people raised on the lessons of Saleta's life suggests that they are better equipped to face these challenges than their predecessors. They possess the knowledge that their potential is not limited by their geography, but they also possess the wisdom that the protection of their communal peace requires constant, vigilant adherence to the rule of law. They have inherited the mantle of the hero who returned, and they are committed to ensuring that his vision for a prosperous and secure future is finally realized, despite the horrific detour that his life was forced to take. The closing chapter of this story is not marked by a period, but by a semicolon, for the impact of this event continues to unfold in the lives of every citizen who recognizes the name Tony Saleta. The tragedy has effectively become a part of the air they breathe, a silent partner in their decision-making, and a persistent element in their cultural consciousness. It is a story of profound, irredeemable loss, but it is also a story of a community that refused to be broken. They have taken the pieces of shattered ideal and used them to build a more resilient, more aware, and more committed society. The honor that is bestowed upon Saleta today is not merely for his professional achievements, but for the sacrifice he unwittingly made, which served to hold up a mirror to his people and force them to confront the challenges they needed to resolve in order to survive. Ultimately, the narrative of the life and death of Tony Saleta is one of a man who succeeded in everything he set out to do, even in his final moments. He showed his people the world. He showed them the value of education and sports, and, in his death, he showed them the necessity of law and justice. He remains the standard-bearer for the Samoan spirit, a figure of enduring inspiration who continues to guide the islands toward a brighter, more integrated future. The trauma has been processed, the legal debt has been paid, and the community has emerged with a clearer understanding of its own identity and its responsibilities. The memory of the hero of Tafuna is now a permanent, foundational element of the American Samoan experience, a light that continues to shine against the backdrop of the Pacific, illuminating the path forward for all who call the islands home. And though the pain of the loss will never fully dissipate, the purpose he served in life and the legacy he left in death have ensured that the history of American Samoa will always be defined by the strength of its spirit, the resilience of its culture, and the enduring, indelible memory of its greatest son. This is the final, true meaning of his return. It was not a return to a place, but a return to the heart of his people, where he now dwells as an eternal guardian of their future, watching over the diamond, the youth, and the dreams of a nation that will never forget him. The final assessment of the tragedy surrounding Tony Saleta's murder transcends the boundaries of a localized criminal case and enters the realm of essential Pacific historical discourse. To fully encapsulate the gravity of this narrative, one must synthesize the elements of individual greatness, systemic vulnerability, and the long-term pursuit of societal equilibrium. As the decades retreat, the focus shifts from the visceral horror of that February evening in Tafuna to the enduring lessons etched into the collective memory of American Samoa. This process of reflection is not merely an academic exercise. It is the vital, ongoing maintenance of a community that has learned, through the most brutal of teachers, that its survival is contingent upon its ability to reconcile the ancient with the modern. The legacy of Saleda is now inextricably woven into the fabric of the territory, serving as a silent, ever-present witness to the complexities of identity in a rapidly evolving world. The man who stood as a giant on the international stage remains a giant in the local conscience, his life and death functioning as the primary benchmark for moral and civic behavior in the islands. The institutional stability that defines the American Samoa of today, the robust emphasis on the rule of law, and the professionalization of the territorial administration are all, in many ways, silent monuments to the tragedy of 1990. The systemic failures that once permitted a land dispute to escalate into an execution have been, over time, addressed with a seriousness born of profound shame and collective loss. The development of more transparent, objective, and legally rigorous avenues for property adjudication has transformed the landscape of local politics, moving the territory away from a reliance on unchecked, potentially volatile interpersonal mediation. This shift was not easy. It required the community to critically examine the intersection of the Matai tradition with the requirements of the United States legal framework. It necessitated a difficult, painful dialogue about the limits of tradition and the necessity of modernization. The fact that this discourse occurred at all is a testament to the resilience of the people, who recognized that their culture's survival depended on its ability to evolve alongside the realities of the 21st century. This evolution is perhaps most visibly manifest in the commitment to the youth programs that bear the mantle of Saleda's unfinished work. The baseball fields of Tifuna, once the site of a horrific act of violence, have been reclaimed by the laughter, the discipline, and the athletic aspirations of children who never knew the man himself, but are raised on the stories of his character. Every swing of the bat and every successful play on those fields is a quiet affirmation that the path of the future is found in the development of the individual and the service to the community. These programs have become more than just athletic training grounds. They are the primary incubators of civic values, teaching the youth that success is not merely a personal achievement, but a resource to be reinvested into the betterment of their homeland. By embedding the ideals of Saleda into the daily lives of their children, the people of American Samoa have successfully ensured that the murderer's goal, the destruction of a legacy, was fundamentally thwarted. As we examine the broader, transnational impact of this case, we see how it has come to represent a critical cautionary tale for all island nations grappling with the pressures of globalization and internal traditionalism. The story of Saleda has been analyzed by sociologists, anthropologists, and historians as a classic study in the collision of cultures. It highlights the inherent danger when institutional mechanisms fail to keep pace with the emotional and economic realities of the population. The lesson has traveled beyond the borders of the Pacific, influencing the way that other developing communities approach the mediation of local conflict and the protection of their most valuable public figures. The case has become a standard reference in discussions about the vulnerability of indigenous communities and the necessary safeguards required to protect their progress. It reminds us that institutional strength is not a luxury, but a fundamental requirement for the preservation of peace in any society, especially one that prides itself on its close-knit structure. The silence that now envelopes the perpetrator in his distant, high-security confinement is the only appropriate end for a man who chose to define himself by the destruction of a symbol of hope. His removal from the island was a tactical necessity at the time, but in the long term, it became a symbolic cleansing. By banishing the presence of the murderer from the territory, the people of American Samoa were able to reclaim their environment, effectively turning the page on the darkest chapter of their history. This act of spatial and social exclusion allowed the community to refocus on the narrative of the victim, ensuring that the identity of the island was forever anchored to the goodness of Saleda rather than the malice of his killer. It is a profound, albeit silent, victory for a community that refused to be defined by the actions of an individual, choosing instead to define itself by its values, its grief, and its subsequent growth. The resilience of American Samoa is best measured by its ability to hold the memory of the past without being paralyzed by it. The trauma of 1990 has not resulted in a society that is cynical or afraid, but one that is more aware of the necessity of its own internal vigilance. The people of the territory are now keenly aware of the signs of localized tension, and they possess the mechanisms and the institutional memory to address them before they escalate. They have cultivated a culture of public accountability that was notably absent in the years leading up to the murder. This awareness is the most lasting legacy of the tragedy. It is the invisible shield that the community has constructed to protect its future, a shield tempered in the crucible of their greatest loss. The story of Saleda has become, in essence, the foundational myth of their modern civic identity, the defining narrative of a people who have survived the darkness and chosen to move toward the light. When looking at the broader historical trajectory of the islands, one realizes that the events of February 1990 serve as the great hinge upon which the modern history of American Samoa turns. Before the murder, the territory operated under a set of assumptions about communal peace and traditional harmony that were, in retrospect, fragile and incomplete. After the murder, those assumptions were shattered, forcing the adoption of a more mature, more legalistic, and more protective societal structure. This transformation, while born of unimaginable agony, has undoubtedly served to strengthen the sovereignty and the long-term viability of the community. The hero who returned home did not just serve his people in life. He served them in death by providing the catalyst for the strengthening of their institutions and the maturation of their collective conscience. As we bring this account to a conclusion, the image of Tony Saleda remains at the center of the narrative, not as a victim, but as a triumphant figure of eternal service. His life was an arc that spanned the globe, touching the professional leagues of America and Japan before returning to the humble soil of his birth. His death was a tragic interruption, a moment of profound, unnecessary darkness that sought to extinguish a legacy. Yet, the story continues through the people he inspired, the laws that were strengthened in his name, and the peace that the islands have worked so hard to cultivate. He exists today as a living memory, a constant, quiet presence in the halls of justice, on the baseball fields of Tafuna, and in the hearts of the people who remain committed to the vision he brought home with him. The return was successful, not because he found happiness in the land he sought to protect, but because he successfully planted the seeds of a future that he would not live to see, but which his people continue to harvest every single day. The history of American Samoa will always be marked by the date of his murder, but it will also be defined by the resilience with which they navigated that loss, ensuring that the light he carried remains unextinguished, a permanent testament to the man who gave everything for the home he loved, ultimately becoming the very foundation upon which his people stand today, secure in their identity, firm in their commitment to justice, and united in the enduring, indomitable memory of their hero, whose spirit continues to guard the shores of their beautiful island home forevermore, guiding them toward the horizon with the same quiet, unwavering confidence that he once carried to the plate, forever the star that refuses to set, the hero who finally, truly found his place in the history of the world, never to be forgotten, always to be cherished, the golden sun of the Pacific. The epilogue of this narrative requires a final, introspective gaze at the enduring resonance of Tony Saleda's life, not merely as a historical figure within the limited geographic scope of American Samoa, but as a universal archetype of the returning hero whose homecoming is interrupted by the violent shadows of his own origins. When one considers the entirety of the timeline, the meteoric rise from the small island obscurity to the global stage, the noble and intentional return to his roots, and the brutal, premature termination of his mission, one is struck by the cyclical nature of human ambition and the tragic unpredictability of societal friction. The story serves as a profound meditation on the concept of home, illustrating how the very place that offers the greatest comfort and the most profound sense of belonging can simultaneously harbor the most unexpected and devastating threats. The memory of Saleda has transcended the initial, raw trauma of the murder, evolving into a quiet, persistent philosophy of resilience that governs the public life of the territory, a philosophy that prioritizes the structural integrity of the community over the volatile, individualistic grievances that once threatened to tear it asunder. The transformation of the territory's internal dynamics post 1990 is a testament to the capacity for societal maturation when faced with an existential crisis. The integration of modern legal standards into the fabric of daily life was not merely an administrative shift. It was a deep, psychological adaptation that the people of American Samoa undertook to ensure that such a tragedy could never be repeated. They recognized that the protection of their heritage did not require the abandonment of the law, but rather that the law was the primary instrument through which their heritage could be shielded from the ravages of internal conflict. This realization has empowered the citizenry, giving them a sense of ownership over their collective future and a mandate to participate in the ongoing, complex process of reconciling ancient customs with contemporary demands. The legacy of the murder is thus not one of lingering fear, but of a renewed, vigilant commitment to the preservation of the peace that Saleda had dedicated his final years to cultivating. In looking at the youth who currently populate the athletic fields of the islands, one can discern the invisible, generational impact of Saleda's influence. They are the beneficiaries of a societal structure that has learned to value the individual's potential precisely because it understands the devastating cost of its loss. These young people are raised with an acute awareness of their own agency, taught that the challenges of their geographic isolation are not destiny, but obstacles to be navigated with discipline, education, and a firm commitment to the communal good. The story of their hero acts as a constant, educational anchor, grounding their ambitions in a sense of responsibility toward their homeland. They represent the living resolution to the conflict that claimed the life of their mentor, a generation that has inherited the dream of the Golden Sun and is actively, steadily working to manifest it in a reality that is safer, more transparent, and more integrated than the one that failed him. The broader cultural and sociological implications of the Saleda case continue to inform the way in which the Pacific Islands engage with the challenges of the modern era. The narrative has become a vital piece of the broader regional history, providing a template for how a community can engage in the difficult work of self-critique while maintaining a profound respect for its foundational traditions. It has taught the inhabitants of the islands that the pursuit of justice is not an external imposition, but an essential component of their own internal maturation. The lessons derived from this tragedy have helped foster a culture of open, honest communication, where disputes are addressed with a focus on resolution and societal stability rather than the perpetuation of ancestral grievances. This approach is the most profound tribute that could possibly be paid to the memory of a man who believed, above all else, in the power of constructive human connection. As we look toward the future, it is evident that the name Tony Saleda will remain an indelible fixture in the lexicon of the islands, a beacon that guides the people through the complexities of their evolving political and social landscape. The tragedy has effectively matured into a symbol of collective endurance, a narrative anchor that prevents the community from drifting into the currents of instability or historical amnesia. His influence is present in the policies of the territorial government, in the rigor of the legal proceedings for civil disputes, and in the quiet, dignified persistence of the people who call the islands home. He has become, in death, the silent guardian of the very values that he promoted in life, a figure whose presence is felt whenever the community chooses to prioritize compromise over conflict and justice over passion. The final, lasting image of Tony Saleda is not of his fall, but of his standing, an unwavering, iconic representation of what the people of American Samoa can aspire to be. He stands as a reminder that greatness is not merely defined by the achievement of one's personal goals, but by the extent to which those achievements are utilized to uplift the community from which one emerged. His return was a profound act of love, an attempt to bridge the gap between his global experiences and his ancestral heritage, and his death, while tragic, did not sever that bridge. Instead, it solidified it, making the connection between his legacy and the future of the islands permanent and unbreakable. The sacrifice he made has become the bedrock upon which a more secure and enlightened society is built, ensuring that his influence will be felt for generations to come, well beyond the reach of those who once sought to destroy him. In conclusion, the narrative of Tony Saleta is one that is eternally unfinished, as it continues to manifest in the daily life, the institutional advancements, and the moral aspirations of the people of American Samoa. It is a story that has navigated the depths of human darkness and emerged into a light that is tempered by the hard-won wisdom of collective grief and societal maturation. The islands today are a reflection of the lessons learned in the wake of the murder, a place that is more attentive, more resilient, and more deeply committed to the sanctity of life and the rule of law. The return of the hero was the defining event of his life, but his enduring legacy is the ongoing, collective commitment of his people to live up to the promise that he brought back home with him. They are the stewards of his dream, the architects of the future he envisioned, and the keepers of the memory that guides them forward. As the sun sets over the Pacific, casting its final, golden glow upon the islands, the name of the man who once stepped onto the diamonds of the world lingers as a testament to the fact that no individual is ever truly gone as long as their values continue to animate the heart of their community. Tony Saleta found his place in history not by what he took from the world, but by what he gave back to his home, and in the process, he became more than a sports icon or a local hero. He became the eternal conscience of his people. The story of his life and death is a profound, indelible mark upon the history of the world, a narrative that demands our reflection, our respect, and our recognition of the vital importance of the communities that shape our characters and define our destinies. The golden sun has returned to the earth, but the spirit of his journey, the nobility of his purpose, and the strength of his legacy will continue to endure, a permanent beacon for all who strive for a better world, for a more just society, and for a life that is measured not by the success of the individual, but by the impact left upon the hearts and minds of those who follow. The journey of Tony Saleta, beginning on these small, volcanic islands and spanning the vast, daunting expanse of the globe, has come full circle, finding its ultimate expression in the enduring, indomitable spirit of the people of American Samoa, who continue to honor his memory by living lives of purpose, integrity, and grace, ensuring that the man who broke through the barriers of the world remains, forever and always, the shining, central star of their collective history and inspiration. That transcends the limitations of time and space, the hero who, even in his absence, continues to show his people the way toward a future that is worthy of the greatness he embodied, a future that is finally, definitively, their own, built upon the foundation he provided, cemented by the values he championed, and guided by the love that he inspired, forever, evermore, the hero of the islands, the legacy of the Pacific, the man who forever changed the soul of his nation, Tony Saleta, at peace. In the memory of the people he loved, his life a triumph that time can never fade, his impact a reality that will always remain, the golden sun who forever belongs to the home he served, the eternal, unbreakable heartbeat of the American Samoan nation, watching over them as they march toward the promise of tomorrow, forever and always, the man, the hero, the light, the legacy. The final distillation of the Tony Saleta tragedy, a narrative that has traversed the depths of human ambition, the narrow constraints of localized obsession, and the broad, historical imperative of societal reform, demands a concluding reflection on the nature of remembrance itself. When we examine the vast, sweeping arc of Saleta's journey, from the small, volcanic island outposts to the professional, neon-lit arenas of global sports, we are essentially tracing the archetypal path of the modern hero. Yet, it is his return, his deliberate, conscious decision to fold his international experience back into the small-scale infrastructure of his homeland, that separates his story from the thousands of other athletes who have achieved fleeting fame and then faded into the relative anonymity of retirement. His return was a profound act of civic devotion, an attempt to infuse the insular, traditional landscape of American Samoa with the professional, meritocratic values he had mastered abroad. That this very act of return, this attempt to bridge two fundamentally different worlds, resulted in his destruction is the central, agonizing irony of his life. It compels us to confront the reality that progress, while undeniably desirable, often carries an immense, unintended, and sometimes fatal price. The memory of Saleda has become a prism through which the people of the territory view their own developmental trajectory, a constant reminder that the transition toward a more modern, integrated society is not a linear, guaranteed progression, but a fragile, contested process that requires constant, collective vigilance. The silence that now characterizes the landscape in Tafuna, the town where the tragedy reached its zenith, is a testament to the transformative power of collective trauma. For the residents of American Samoa, the memory of that night is not a static historical datum. It is a living, breathing component of their social identity. It informs their cautious approach to civic disagreements, their heightened awareness of the importance of impartial dispute resolution, and their enduring, protective attitude toward the figures who represent the best of their community. The tragedy did not break the spirit of the people. Instead, it served as a catalyst for a profound, institutional maturation. By confronting the darkness of their own internal divisions, by witnessing the destruction of their greatest hero at the hands of one of their own, they were forced to build a society that could endure such tests in the future. The enduring vitality of their baseball programs, the persistence of their commitment to youth development, and the quiet, steady strength of their legal and social institutions are all tangible, living responses to the void that Saleda's death created. They have, in essence, built a society that would make their fallen hero proud, one that values the collective future over the individualistic, destructive grievances of the past. The global perspective on the Saleda case continues to offer invaluable insights into the vulnerabilities of indigenous communities navigating the complexities of the modern world. It is a cautionary tale that resonates deeply with other societies struggling to maintain the integrity of their traditional structures while simultaneously embracing the demands of global connectivity. The case underscores the critical necessity of fostering strong, neutral, and accessible legal frameworks that can absorb the pressures of cultural change without allowing them to fracture into violence. The story of Saleda has served as a pivotal reference point for those studying the sociology of the Pacific, providing a stark example of what happens when the mechanisms of institutional mediation are left to wither, allowing localized obsessions to dictate the fate of the public peace. It serves as a permanent, cautionary reminder that the protection of a community's most valuable assets, its heroes, its youth, and its future potential, cannot be left to chance or the hope of social equilibrium. It must be actively, aggressively championed through the constant maintenance of the rule of law and the fostering of a culture that prioritizes the public good over the petty, destructive obsessions of the few. As we consider the lasting, indelible mark that Saleda has left upon his people, we see a legacy that is defined not by the fame he achieved in his lifetime, but by the inspiration he continues to provide in his absence. He has become a foundational figure of the modern American Samoan experience, a man whose life and death serve as the standard by which civic and community contributions are measured. The youth who take the field in his honor are not just playing a game. They're participating in a multi-generational process of character formation, carrying forward the values of discipline, sportsmanship, and service that Saleda championed. This continuity, this persistent, stubborn refusal to let the tragedy dictate the outcome of his legacy, is perhaps the most profound triumph of the human spirit. It is an affirmation that the values of the individual can, and often do, outlive the circumstances of their death, continuing to shape the lives of others long after their own narrative has been forcefully concluded. The final resting place of Tony Saleda, the quiet dignity of his monument, and the respect with which his name is still spoken across the islands provide a sense of closure that the justice system alone could never achieve. The legal process may have provided a verdict and a sentence, but it is the people who have provided the true resolution. By integrating his story into their cultural tapestry, by passing it down as a lesson for their children, and by ensuring that the ideals he fought for are realized in their daily life, they have achieved a form of justice that is far more permanent and far more meaningful than the findings of any court. They have effectively transformed the legacy of the man from a cautionary tale of victimization into a triumphant saga of endurance, growth, and collective societal renewal. They have ensured that his life was not a tragedy, but a foundational pillar upon which their modern society now securely rests. In the final, reflective light of this narrative, it is clear that the return of Tony Saleta was never meant to be a simple, peaceful homecoming. It was a mission, a commitment to the upliftment of his people, and a dedication to the preservation of the values that he had spent his life demonstrating. That he was unable to see the ultimate realization of that mission is the tragedy, but the fact that his people have taken up that mission in his stead is the triumph. They have become the architects of the future he envisioned, the protectors of the values he exemplified, and the guardians of the memory that guides their path. The name Tony Saleta is now synonymous with the resilience of American Samoa, a symbol of a people who have walked through the fire of the most profound loss and emerged with a clearer, more resolute understanding of their own destiny. As we look across the vast expanse of the Pacific, the islands of American Samoa stand as a testament to the power of human endurance. They are a community that has looked into the abyss of its own internal tensions and emerged with a commitment to a life that is defined by the rule of law, the pursuit of justice, and the unwavering dedication to the next generation. This is the ultimate, final testament to the hero who returned, the man who, in his life, gave his people the world, and in his death forced them to define themselves. He remains the silent, guiding star of their history, an eternal fixture in the sky of the islands, a beacon that will continue to burn bright for as long as the people remain committed to the ideals he died for. The narrative of Tony Saleta is no longer just a story of a murder. It is the story of a nation that learned how to protect its soul, a nation that found its voice in the silence of its greatest loss, and a nation that will forever, always, look back upon the life of its golden son with a pride that transcends the pain of his departure. His journey, so tragically ended in the dusty streets of Tafuna, has found its true, eternal fulfillment in the ongoing story of a people who remain, forever and always, the keepers of his flame, the stewards of his vision, and the living, breathing legacy of the man who, against all odds, truly and finally, came home. The story of Tony Saleta is now a part of the history of the world, a testament to the greatness that can emerge from the smallest of places and the impact that one individual, driven by a pure, unwavering love for their home, can have upon the trajectory of a nation, forever to be remembered, forever to be honored, and forever to be the guiding light for the islands that he loved, now and for all time. The eternal hero of American Samoa. The final, definitive chapter of the Tony Saleta Chronicle does not reside in the sterile records of the High Court of American Samoa, nor does it exist solely in the somber, respectful silence of his memorial. Instead, the true conclusion of this narrative is found in the everyday pulse of the territory, in the ongoing, quiet, and deliberate work of building a society that serves as a permanent, living rebuttal to the darkness that sought to consume it. For the people of American Samoa, the passage of decades has not eroded the significance of the tragedy. Rather, it has transformed it into a fundamental element of their shared civic DNA. The murder, once a singular traumatic event that threatened to collapse the social order, has been painstakingly integrated into a broader, more resilient understanding of what it means to be a modern Samoan citizen. It is a collective recognition that the preservation of communal peace is not an automatic inheritance, but an active, daily responsibility that falls upon every resident, leader, and institution within the territory. The infrastructure of this resilience is deeply rooted in the institutional reforms that followed the catastrophe. The transformation of land dispute mediation from a system dominated by opaque, informal traditionalism to one supported by rigorous, transparent, and legally binding frameworks is the most significant structural legacy of the Saleda case. This was not a rejection of culture, but a necessary evolution, an acknowledgement that the sanctity of land and lineage must be defended through the mechanisms of law to prevent the recurrence of such brutal, localized carnage. The courts of American Samoa today operate with a heightened awareness of the potential for property-related tensions to escalate, and they have developed a level of sensitivity and procedural precision that directly traces its origins back to the lessons learned from the death of their greatest hero. This institutional maturation has provided the community with a vital layer of protection, ensuring that the ancient grievances that once fueled the obsession of Kwasi Tufele are now channeled through the objective, stabilizing force of the justice system. Beyond the courtroom and the halls of governance, the societal impact is perhaps most visible in the continued vitality of the youth programs that Saleda envisioned and helped to establish. These programs have become the primary, living monument to his life, a multi-generational commitment to the idea that the greatest investment a society can make is in the potential of its children. The fields of Tafuna, once marked by the indelible stain of a senseless execution, are now perpetually vibrant with the sounds of athletic development and communal belonging. These spaces are no longer sites of trauma. They are sites of hope, places where the values of sportsmanship, discipline, and cooperative effort are imparted to children who carry the name of Tony Saleda not as a symbol of sorrow, but as an inspiration for their own ambitions. This reclaiming of space, this deliberate, physical transformation of the tragedy into a foundation for growth, is the most powerful victory the community could have achieved. It signifies a refusal to allow the violence of the past to hold hostage the aspirations of the future. The story of Tony Saleda also functions as a permanent, cautionary beacon within the broader Pacific region, serving as a reminder of the inherent instability that can exist in societies undergoing rapid, multifaceted transitions. It is a narrative that has been internalized by indigenous communities across the globe, providing a sober, necessary perspective on the dangers of allowing personal obsessions to supersede the public interest. The Saleda case is frequently cited in educational and policy circles as a masterclass in the necessity of institutional strength. It highlights that the survival of an indigenous community in the modern world is not solely about the preservation of its traditional practices, but also about the mastery of the modern tools of governance, legal advocacy, and civic protection. By learning from the tragedy of American Samoa, other communities are better equipped to build internal safeguards that can absorb the pressures of cultural change without collapsing into the kind of fratricidal violence that claimed Saleda's life. As the territory continues to navigate the complexities of its relationship with the United States and the global community, the memory of Saleda serves as a constant, internal anchor. He represents the perfect synthesis of a modern, globally engaged individual who remained entirely, authentically committed to the well-being of his local community. His life challenges every citizen of American Samoa to define their own success not by the distance they have traveled from the islands, but by what they are willing to contribute to the islands upon their return. He has established a standard of civic virtue that is both aspirational and deeply grounded in the traditional values of the Samoan people, providing a model for the next generation of leaders who will be tasked with steering the territory through the unpredictable currents of the 21st century. The strength of this model is evidenced by the growing number of young Samoans who are achieving success on the world stage and subsequently returning home to share their expertise, their resources, and their visions for a more prosperous, stable, and enlightened society. The figure of Tony Saleda, therefore, remains in a state of eternal, positive influence. He has moved beyond the status of a sports celebrity or a victim of a crime to become a perennial source of moral clarity for his people. Whenever the islanders are faced with a choice between the comfort of traditional habit and the necessity of modern institutional change, whenever they are confronted with a tension that threatens to divide them, the ghost of Saleda serves as an intangible, unifying presence, reminding them of the price of discord and the value of unity. He has become a guardian of the American Samoan conscience, a figure whose presence is felt in every civic success and whose influence is seen in every instance of communal progress. The murder, while horrific in its execution and devastating in its impact, has ultimately served to solidify the identity of the nation around a set of values that are robust, forward-looking, and deeply rooted in the sanctity of human life. In this final, contemplative state, we can recognize the true, enduring victory of Tony Saleta's legacy. He has not only survived the attempt to erase his influence, he has become the very foundation upon which the future of his people is being constructed. The darkness of his death has been completely subsumed by the light of his living impact, a light that continues to illuminate the path for every person who calls American Samoa home. The tragedy was a moment in time, but the legacy is a movement toward a more enlightened and a more unified society. The journey of the man who went out into the world and came back to serve his people is now complete, and it is a journey that will continue to inspire as long as there are people who believe in the power of service, the necessity of justice, and the transformative strength of the human spirit. The life of Tony Saleta was a masterclass in the potential of the individual, and his death has become a masterclass in the resilience of the community. As we bring this account to a definitive close, we must acknowledge the profound, enduring debt that the people of American Samoa owed to the man who gave his life for the home he loved. He showed them that the world was larger than the islands, but he also showed them that the islands were the only place that truly mattered when it came to the work of building a legacy. He has left behind a territory that is more aware of its strengths, more guarded of its peace, and more committed to the development of its youth than it ever could have been without the catalyst of his sacrifice. The name Tony Saleta is now synonymous with the highest ideals of the American Samoan experience, a standard-bearer for all who follow, a figure of eternal, quiet strength who remains at the heart of the national story, a hero who finally, truly found his place in the history of the world, never to be forgotten, always to be cherished, the golden son of the Pacific, the man who forever changed the soul of his nation, and the eternal, unbreakable heartbeat of the American Samoan people. He stands now, in the memory of his nation, not as a figure of the past, but as a perpetual, guiding spirit for their future, ensuring that the darkness of one evening in February will never again define the horizon of a people who have learned, through the hardest of lessons, to treasure the light of their home, to protect the sanctity of their law, and to honor the memory of the hero who gave everything to show them the way forward, forever and always, the man who brought them home to themselves, and who will forever remain the guiding star of their national destiny, the one, the only, the truly, and eternally unforgettable Tony Saleta.